Take the US. Total productivity of the country is spent on healthcare.
Oh, wow. You were pre-diabetic.
This is me when I opened GluCare.
No way. I will put this on.
When I was on that journey in 2021, that message was not out in the world, right? So I just spent a bunch of money and a bunch of time on these medications. Before you go down any of those rabbit holes, you got to do 5 things. Eat whole foods, treat sleep like a job, lift heavy things, walk frequently, and then the last one, which we all ignore, is
Ali Hashemi is the co-founder and CEO of Metabolic, a hybrid healthcare metabolic disease platform, generating among the best outcomes globally for its patients. He is an investor in early-stage ventures at the intersection of health and technology. He also founded Amana Healthcare, the benchmark and fastest-growing continuum of care hospital platform in the Middle East.
If we know that the diabetic was already 3 decades into the journey that led him to be diabetic, is going to have a very difficult time.
Okay, and it goes all the way from amputations, all the way to blindness, to dementia.
Right. And so now it's easy to understand why it costs society so much. If I had a magic wand and I could change one thing, I would abolish the 1-year insurance contract. The 1-year insurance contract is the impediment that leads to underinvestment in prevention.
So here's the thing. Ali, I was looking forward to this for a plethora of reasons. A, you are, and I just had to write it down here because it's a lot, right? Considering everything you do, let's put it that way. So you're the founder and CEO of Metabolic, a health crisis sort of startup or focused startup.
Metabolic is a hybrid healthcare company.
A hybrid healthcare company, okay? And then you're the chairman of GluCare, which is a diabetes-focused startup as well.
Mm-hmm.
You're the managing director of Polymath Ventures, which is a seed-focused investor company, sort of in a health tech. Okay. You're the board member of International Consortium for Health Measurement.
Yeah, that's the International Consortium of Health Outcome Measures.
Health outcome measures.
So that's like value-based care. These are a group of very intelligent people who are trying to define what the future of medicine looks like from a value-based care.
Exactly. You're the chairman of,
but not a board member. I'm on the advisory board.
The advisory board member. Okay. You're the chairman of eCar. I always see them in Dubai here.
Yeah, good. Hopefully they're clean when you see
people. They're clean. I haven't seen them inside. I haven't used them, but we'll talk about them in a minute. Yeah. And you're an MBA lecturer in Fuqua.
At Fuqua, yeah.
So a school of business. So considering everything you're doing, I would say, how do you summarize the overarching mission that you're on in this phase of your life?
Legacy. I want my kids and my kids' kids, because nothing ever goes away nowadays, right? So our parents might have done some mischief, and it's not Googleable. No, everything that you and I do will be perpetually and forever discoverable. And so I think that being a custodian of that legacy is important. And so everything that I do, in part, is about building that story. That story then inspires my own kids, inspires their kids to say, hey, this is the line of whatever, moral compass, philosophical thinking, drive, ambition, contribution, because everything else goes away when you die.
Yeah. Tell me more. I mean, what do you mean by legacy, specifically speaking, from your point of view?
Legacy is changing, right? The definition of legacy. And I think it has something to do with the permanence of information, that every aspect of all of our lives now are somehow tracked, measured, public, posted, social. Like I mentioned earlier, I'm not that present on social media. And that's deliberate. So I'm, quite careful about what I share from the private domain in the public domain. But legacy for me is evolving into, to put it quite simply, I want my kids to be proud of where they've come from. And that is the arc of legacy that doesn't change, whether you talk about our parents' generation or their parents' generation. I mean, legacy is some representation of, I guess, family, in some context, tribe, in some contexts, other form of community. But it's changing because the noise has increased.
Yeah.
And it's hard to actually know for sure whether what is being said and what is manifest is real or not. And so what I'm trying to do is just build something that's real, objectively, and that people can measure and quantify and say, yeah, this is something that was positive, net positive for society. This is the impact that it had. And this is what it spawned. And it's not just personal legacy either. I mean, there's other forms of legacy that have already been created. Look at the Korean Mafia. That's a corporate legacy that, has spawned a whole generation of entrepreneurs. We're not at that stage yet as an organization where we have then spawned the next generation of healthcare entrepreneurs, but maybe one day we'll get to that point. And maybe there's a metabolic legacy where, early employees of our company have gone on to solve even better and bigger problems. So we'll see. I don't know, I'm still figuring it out.
I'll tell you what, that's amazing. That actually is amazing. Think as a mission in your life now to think about legacy. And why do I say it's amazing? It's because I was speaking to Shukri Eid the other day, the CEO of IBM in this
Yeah.
region. He's a
Great guy.
great guy.
Great beard.
Love him. I love him. I asked him about the beard. He said he has a personal connection with it. But anyway, that's a different topic. But he said something to me that actually resonated with everything you just mentioned. He said that there's a problem that is pervasive in our region, which is every generation is reset. So every time a new generation comes in, because the question that I asked him is, why aren't we as innovative as other parts of the world? And he said, there's a generation reset that happens every 20 years. So I started not from where my father left off, and my father did not start from where his father started off, and we did not do what, let's say, Europe or the West or any other place on earth that is prosperous now. We have missed that for the past 60, 70, 80, 100 years. And therefore, it's not easy for one generation, let's say our generation, to achieve what 3-4 generations have done since the late 1800s, let's say, for example, because of this generation reset.
What causes that reset?
That's a very, very excellent question. And, obviously I'm no expert on this type of things, but I resonated with that because in my case and everyone around me, I can think of everyone around me and I can think of people in, let's say, in UK. And you see people who are from families that their fathers and their fathers, you can feel the family legacy has been carried forward since the 1800s, 1700s, and we have that. Now, of course, people will argue the colonialism, the geopolitical instabilities, the different issues that our region is facing, the different influences that our region is facing constantly across the board from everything when it comes to, and I'm not talking about freedom here, right? I'm talking about the way people think. It's just completely different, and it's just resets every generation because of the issues that people are busy grappling with. And that generation reset is almost annihilating legacy at a family, tribe, society, and even nation level. And you see great people that then were great, and that's it. It stops there.
Yeah, I guess there's also a difference between legacy that's inherited and legacy that's earned. So meritocratic versus entitled. Right?
Can you inherit legacy?
Well, in the sense that if you think about the family legacies,
Yeah.
right? And there are many families that are well known, the
Yep.
Kennedys,
Of course.
Rothschild in the West. We all know their names. There are families here with well-known names too. So I think being a Kennedy and the legacy benefits that come along with that are not that's not the kind of legacy that I was focused on when I gave you my definition.
Yeah.
The way I think about legacy is a bit more meritocratic. What have you earned?
So how is that mutually exclusive with meritocracy. You can have that and then add to it meritocracy, don't you?
I don't know.
I think
to be
that's what
honest.
I meant by either you start from 0 or you start from 100. Because the other day I just had a statistic that says 60% of people with wealth or families with wealth, their next generation drop out of wealth, out of sort of
It's
high
the
net worth.
third generation usually.
Yeah, usually the third, second, third generation, and so on and so forth. So if you don't have meritocracy, if you don't earn your own status and position in society, you're bound to actually get out of that sort of legacy.
Mhm.
So there is meritocracy. What I'm trying to say is, imagine if, let's say, you or my family has been established, and I know from my grandfather and great grandfather who I met briefly when I was young, we come from Palestine, from Jaffa, and from a place where we had lands, we had, like most people who were living in that era. And I actually recovered all of those sort of Ottoman era
Mm.
title deeds, and it's like this much. And I was thinking to myself, if what happened in 1930s and 40s did not happen, and we were not expelled like all of the other 700, 800,000 people that were expelled back in the days, and to kind of made me believe that is that we never went, for example, to refugee camps.
Yep.
My grandfather or great grandfather was actually well off, that he was able to collect all the money and then go and buy something else somewhere else, right? But the point is, if he had that not happened, who knows? Maybe.
Where would you be today?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that legacy would be, so when you said legacy and you mentioned your kids and your kids' kids and how this kind of links up, now it starts from you, but then you're deliberate about it. And that's what makes it refreshing, don't you think?
And you wonder why, sometimes I wonder why more people aren't looking at multi-generational reputation. I don't know
Yeah.
if there's a better word for it.
Yeah. Family.
Right?
Yeah.
I don't know. And I think candidly, that's one of the strengths of our culture in our part of the world here. I'm a transplant. I grew up in the States. I was born and raised in St. Louis, Missouri. So when I talk about family, all my family's in California.
California. Oh,
Yeah,
God.
like a 16-hour flight.
Oh, gosh.
So ironically,
So you were born in the States.
I was born in St. Louis, Missouri. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Iranian redneck.
Oh, that's a good gosh.
But,
now you're under the spotlight, right?
But I think
Between
part
both
of the value of the Arab and Muslim culture is that it is still very much family centric.
Absolutely.
Which is something that I think most pockets in the United States is absent.
In the West, generally speaking.
Yeah. And that's one of the reasons why we've stayed, why this is now our home. Right? I've been here 17 years now, 18. Oh gosh, 18
Oh,
years.
wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic that even though the last 50, 60, 70 years have been slower for the Muslim world, the Arab world, let's include, our friends north of us in that.
Yeah.
I am optimistic that the tides are changing.
Look, it's funny that you're mentioning this, because when you ask me about Aximind and what's the purpose and mission, I always look at it as this block of land. I don't subscribe to, and don't call me nationalist or otherwise or globalist. I don't care about these titles that it's been assigned to us. But the way I think of it is all of those borders that's been given to us, it's been designed by someone else. And I always see us as a block of land as one people.
Mhm.
Right? It doesn't matter. We share the same values. We share the same destiny. We share the same vision. We share the same mission. We share the same almost everything. Right? And that's a good thing. That's a nice thing. That's a beautiful thing. When it comes to what do I want to do here is bring everything you mentioned now to the spotlight again. Is you have the family, you have the society, you have the nation, and then you have everybody's included. What are we missing? And how can we create a legacy again? Because if we focus on our family, if we focus on our society, if we focus on the things that are merit-based, that we earn, and we'll come to your point, that philosophical point of merit and focus and substance versus performative and decorative initiatives. And
Yeah.
I have my own views on that. But okay, let me retract a bit. Where is this coming from? What was the source that kind of inspired all of this thinking for you?
In what sense?
This thinking about everything that you're doing now is to build a legacy.
What else is there? I mean, at the end of the day, if you peel away the superficiality of everything that we do, a lot of it is ego-based and vanity, right? What you're building, the accomplishments, and so on. And I come from a fairly religious family, so there's that arc of longer-term thinking, you should say. I discovered late in life that in many ways I'm quite similar to my father, in the sense that both of us were square pegs in a round hole all our lives. And so late in life, I discovered that arc of personality that got us both into trouble, I should say.
Did you reject it initially?
Huh?
Did you reject it initially?
What do you mean?
You rejected being similar to your father
No,
initially when you were
I
younger.
absolutely embraced it.
Okay.
It was,
Oh, okay, that's good.
yeah.
Okay.
And I'm seeing some of that in my own kids too. So, look, I think that's how we're wired, honestly, as humans, right? It's a prehistoric thing. We're wired to care about our progeny, and we're wired to take care of our elders too.
Mhm.
And in the West, let's say, broad generalization, a lot of that, we've lost a lot of that. Well, I was just commenting to somebody the other day. Someone asked me in my last business, the one that I had sold, why didn't I build a nursing home? Because we were doing subacute care. And there isn't really a nursing home kind of economy here,
No, not at all.
right? I mean,
You know the story in Qatar, right?
no,
They were forced to build nursing homes for the FIFA because they had to fulfill some things. And then they actually had 0 clients for the entirety of its existence until today.
I didn't know that.
That's funny.
Yeah.
That's actually hilarious. Yeah, so there's no economy for these types
There's
of
no
things,
economy
so-
for that. And it's part and parcel. I mean, it's connected to,
the values.
right. And there's a use, actually, I would say there's probably a market for elderly care for very specific things, but not in the way that exists in the United States, for example, where it's almost a default that once someone reaches a certain age,
It's like a
The-
hospice, isn't it?
hospice is different. Hospice is
I know,
yeah.
of course, I know. But
Yeah.
it's looked at as if it's the end of
I think
thing.
hospice is something we don't have here that we should. So better care of end of life is something that
Terminally ill.
families struggle with. So that's a problem that is worth solving. But nursing home care as like a parking lot for your
Yeah.
elders is something that exists in the West profoundly. And look, not to sort of pass moral judgment on the country that I
It's
grew
just
up in, but
descriptive analysis of how things are. I mean, it's not,
Yeah,
it's
and
not about evaluative, evaluating certain, values or something.
but it's also a reflection of how life has evolved in the West. Kids can't afford to take care of their parents, right? They can't
They
afford
can,
to,
of course, yeah.
right? If you've got, a dual income household and each of those individuals might have themselves a job and a part-time side gig. I mean, and then you've got the kids and the load. And I wonder if we're headed in that direction here too, right? Where
Do you
somehow,
think so?
I don't know. I mean, it's,
Do you see any signals of it?
I haven't, no,
Okay.
no signals of that, but,
Because I know for a fact, I mean, I was born and raised here. I know all of my friends, not even remotely. I mean, how do you see it? You see it from the treatment of the elderly, like you see it from the respect, the kind of appreciation, the how grateful they are to their,
right.
especially parents and elderly. And you go to the mosque and you see them. You go to the shopping mall and you see how they're always letting them walk ahead of them. When they're in a restaurant, you always see if there's a family, the kind of the head of the table is usually the older person, which is
Right.
usually the dad. So you can see those. I haven't seen any signals that kind of suggests
That's changing.
does that.
And
I
it's
haven't
beautiful.
seen
I
it.
love seeing that.
Yeah.
I'll give you a practical problem.
Right.
And this is related to how our society here is evolving and how the leadership here is hoping the society will evolve. Residency visas used to be tied only to whether or not you have a job and an income. But now there are mechanisms for people to come here for retirement.
Yep.
There's a practical problem with that. Try getting your dad insurance. health
Mhm.
insurance, right? So we'll have to figure this stuff out.
But it's not necessary, is it?
Well,
To have it's not a legal requirement. That's what I'm trying to say.
no, everyone needs to, I believe everyone needs to have health insurance, but whether or not it's a legal requirement is actually not the crux of the issue. The
'Cause
crux of
what-
the
what-
issue is risk.
What I'm saying is because let's say, for example, in our case, my father is sponsored by me, and they're, by mere fact of us having the golden visa. So everybody has the 10-year, and that's for my kids, my wife, but also my parents. And that's
Right,
good, right?
right.
So that's perfect. But they don't have insurance here. They have
Right.
insurance back in Jordan,
Mm.
right? So, and alhamdulillah, we never needed any of that. But just in case we needed that, it's available in our home country, not
Right.
here. And that's what's expected. I don't know. What do you think?
That's not practical, is it? What if
Mm.
something happens?
Right.
God forbid.
Right.
God forbid, some adverse event happens,
Yeah.
whatever it might be, and your loved one ends up in a hospital here. We have to have a mechanism.
Yeah.
We have to have the social safety net.
But there's none. I tried. They don't have insurance for.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we
Like,
cannot.
I think above 65, they say no. Sorry, we can't insure.
And if they offer you an insurance plan, it'll cost an inordinate amount of money.
Yeah.
So these are things that we have to think about as we think about the evolution of society here.
Here.
Here,
Because that's very unique demographic that probably doesn't exist anywhere in the world. Because everywhere in the world, the citizens are the residents. Here, the residents are not the citizens. They're like you and I,
Correct.
expats who come here. So who said that the government should take care of their livelihoods, if that makes sense?
Correct. And the fact that there is no income tax here is part of the issue, right? In other places, if you go to Singapore, for example, they have great healthcare. If you go to any country in which there is a national mechanism or safety net to take care of people who don't have insurance, that
Not
has to be
citizens again.
citizens or non-citizens.
Oh, non-citizens.
Yeah,
Okay.
right. I mean, there is a mechanism for that to be funded, and that mechanism is usually
The
tax
income tax.
revenue. Yeah. So these things will evolve and we'll figure it out. But
Of course, yeah.
the question you had asked me, is there any signals that would lead you to believe that we're not going to be able to maintain the sort of like family cohesive unit? And from my own experience, like if I was somebody who would not be able to afford to take the risk of bringing my parents, absent insurance, given their age, I wouldn't bring them.
Really?
Right? I mean, if your parents are 80, 90 years old, potentially they have multiple comorbidities. One's got diabetes, one's got, another issue, right? If there's real risk,
Yeah.
and let's say you're not from a country that's close,
Right.
where it's
Of
a
course.
10-hour, 12-hour flight.
I mean, you'd be wanting to move houses to live next to a hospital, right? So imagine if you're in a complete country that doesn't have. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, and healthcare is expensive. I mean, land
100%.
yourself in an ICU, you'll end up with a 10,000 dirham bill every night.
At least.
So
Yeah.
these things we'll have to figure out.
What are you doing to figure it out?
Personally, that's not something that I'm tackling. It's above my pay grade. I think that is
Really? You're not advising some policymakers to see what we can do to kind of change the rules of the game?
I hope people smarter than me are tackling that, because it's a tough one. It's not an easy one.
No.
It has to do with a lot of different factors: tax and tax policy, immigration policy. There's obviously the sensitivity around the ratio between expats and locals. So there's a lot to unpack in that question of how does society evolve and how do we pay for that evolution. What we're trying to do is tackle underlying risk in the population, fundamentally, right? And so if you look at our population, not just the UAE, but across the GCC, we are the most metabolically unhealthy population on Earth.
What does that mean?
That means that we're, on average, on a relative basis, much more obese, much more diabetic. The obesity rates and the diabetes rates in the GCC across the board are among the highest in the world. In fact, if you look at some of the statistics and you take out small island countries in the Pacific that have a weird genetic thing going on, I think we are probably 5 or 6 out of the top fattest and most diabetic countries on the planet. The US is up there too. But It's not good. Overlaid on that is the fact that we're still a young population. So we're extraordinarily obese
All right.
and we're diabetic despite the fact that we're younger
As
on
opposed
average.
to, let's say,
And more elderly and more mature population. So that should scare everybody, because as our population here ages, those predispositions and those risks will only get worse and will only magnify. So we are facing a tsunami of risk that's coming. And it's going to be very difficult to bend that risk curve if you wait until the diabetes has been anchored in somebody for a decade, or the obesity has been, so what we're trying to do is figure out new models of care that can help bend that risk curve within the constraints of the current ecosystem. But the other side of this question is, well, why is it that we are so metabolically dysfunctional? It's not just the GCC, it's almost everywhere on Earth, by the way. It's just that on a relative basis, we're much worse off here. But if you go to India or China or the US or Europe, I mean, there's still a 10% plus incidence rate.
Before we go to the why, because I'm obviously interested to unpacking with you and discussing the root causes. But before we go there, what's the result of that, apart from the obvious health issues, but economically, societally, what's the ramifications of having a metabolically sick population?
Well, okay, so great question. Start at the big picture. What does it cost society? Direct cost. Take the US, where US obesity rates and diabetes rates are similar to the GCC. 20% of total GDP. So total productivity of the country is spent on healthcare.
Because of that.
Partly. 1/4 of that total spend is related to metabolic health.
Oh, wow.
It's huge. 5%, 4 to 5% of
the
total
entire
GDP. Right. And I would suspect, I haven't seen those numbers directly for the region, but I would suspect it's not far off.
So if let's say that issue does not exist, then we'll get back 5% of the GDP to be spent on bridges and
potential. Yeah. I mean, you could think of it that way. Is if we bend our risk curve
and education,
we'll spend less on things that are not creating productivity, right?
Yeah.
Creating abundance. These are all tax.
Because these are expenses.
It's a tax.
Yeah.
Metabolic dysfunction is a tax on life. So down to the individual level, if you are somebody who's diabetic, what happens? Well, if you're a poorly controlled diabetic.
What does that mean?
Okay, so good question. So how does it evolve? You are a healthy person,
right?
When you're born,
of course,
and you become progressively less healthy.
Okay.
At some point, you will cross into a phase where you are pre-diabetic. And most of the time, nobody knows because it's not symptomatic.
What does pre-diabetic mean?
It means you're not yet diabetic. Okay. So it's a little bit, I don't want to say an arbitrary designation, but the medical community got together and decided that there will be certain thresholds above which someone will be called pre-diabetic and above which someone will be called
the sugar level and insulin.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly right. And so
like you're on the edge.
So if you're pre-diabetic, it means that there are signs that your body is already
inhibiting or
losing sensitivity to insulin and not as efficient as it should be in the metabolism of blood sugar.
Okay.
Essentially.
So explain to me a little bit between the relationship between sugar and glucose and insulin.
Okay, good question. So when you eat, what you eat gets broken down in your gut into its constituent components. One of those components is sugar, and your body runs off of sugar. Your brain runs off of ketones and sugar, but you need sugar to survive. So it's not in and of itself a bad thing.
Right.
And at any given point, there's about a sugar cube's worth of glucose in your bloodstream.
Right.
And it's very precise.
Okay.
If you have 2 sugar cubes worth of blood of sugar in your
sugar
bloodstream,
cube, the one that
the little ones, your tea.
Yeah.
If you have 2 of those, you're in bad shape. So it's a very tightly controlled.
Okay.
And so
what can make it 2?
Well, dysregulation. So the point is that your body, everyone's bodies, is very precise about how it manages the concentration of sugar in the bloodstream.
Okay.
When you eat, more sugar gets dumped in from your gut, right? It gets absorbed in your gut down here. And the moment it gets absorbed, even before that point, there are signals that's being sent to your brain and then your pancreas to start releasing the hormones and the peptides that will help you metabolize. In other words, help
Okay.
you
Process. Yeah.
right? And that's normal and it's natural.
So transform it into, energy or, whatever it is that you need to use the glucose for.
Correct. So
Okay.
glucose in the muscle is ultimately turned into adenosine triphosphate, and that goes into a cycle of energy production. That's kind of the core unit of energy production,
Right.
or energy consumption
Oh, okay.
in the mitochondria in your muscle. However, think of it as like, well, if you've got solar panels on your house,
Right.
during the day, you're going to be producing a whole bunch of energy. You might not use all of it. So you'll want a mechanism to store it so
Yep.
you can use it at night. So there is that function too within your body. So if you're eating food, you won't use it all immediately. You might want to store it to use it a bit later when you go for a long hike, or if
Yes.
you're asleep for a long period of time.
You're
and so-
recovering from a workout or something.
Right.
Yeah.
And so when you eat, your body reacts by sending signals to different organ systems in your body
Mhm.
to treat that same blood sugar differently. So insulin, which is a peptide produced by the pancreas, sends different messages to different parts of the body.
Right.
Your pancreas will produce insulin in response to you eating something.
Okay.
Okay. And then that insulin.
Anything?
Yeah. I mean, it's a response to anything that has sugar
Right.
contained in it. So
Right.
the increase in concentration of blood sugar is the signal that triggers the release
The
of
release.
insulin. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
If you don't have an increase in blood sugar, there'll be a very minimal.
So if I ate a steak,
You will still have an insulin response because
right.
everything has a metabolic effect. There's no
Gotcha.
sort of.
Okay.
But if you eat something that is completely bereft of any caloric value,
Oh, okay.
right? So if you drink water, for example, it's not going to be an insulin
Right.
response.
Gotcha. Yeah. Okay.
And so insulin will tell your muscles, hey, there's sugar in the bloodstream, take it out of the bloodstream. So
The muscles.
the muscle cells, right?
Right.
So the cells in your muscles will then have receptors on those cells that accept glucose molecules and bring them into the cell so that the mitochondria can then metabolize those
Okay.
molecules into energy. However, at the same time, that same insulin molecule, that peptide, is telling your liver, hey, there's glucose in the bloodstream, take it out of the bloodstream and store it
Where?
in the liver
In the liver.
as
Okay.
glycogen,
Okay.
but also in your adipose tissue, your fat tissue, as fat cells.
Right. Gotcha. Okay.
So all of that's happening at the same time.
okay. So the
it's-
muscle
Muscle, fat tissue, glycogen in the liver.
in the liver.
All three.
Okay.
And that's a really delicate dance. It's a balance. And so there's a really interesting analogy I like to give that makes it a bit more understandable, that hopefully your audience will relate to. Maybe I went to too many after hours clubs when I was in medical school. I don't know. But if you ever had a friend in college who just listened to, too much AC/DC and
Oh,
hardcore
goodness
rock,
me,
you know? Okay. If you ever got that friend that just listened to too much loud music,
Yeah.
think of that friend among three other friends in a crowded room across the room, and you're trying to say something to that group of friends. The friend that listened to all of that
Hard.
hardcore music, that's the muscle cell. The friends that were in their books and their ears are just fine because they didn't listen to loud music, that's your fat cell. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
You are the pancreas, and you're trying to send those two guys a signal, and you're saying something to them. Hey, do this thing. Well, your muscle cell guy, he can't hear you. He's like, well, hang on, say that again. I can't hear you. And so you say it louder, and you keep saying it louder and louder and louder until finally he can hear you. He's like, oh, okay, I get you now. I get you. But your liver cell friend over there and your fat cell friend over there, they heard you at the lowest volume. So as you've been increasing your volume, they've been doing more of what you've been telling them to do. Does that make sense?
100%.
Okay, so that's called insulin insensitivity. Your muscle cells are less sensitive to the pancreas's signal.
What is that?
Well, that's just a function of the whole process of
This is how it
metabolic
is.
dysfunction.
Right.
Exactly.
Right. Okay.
And that's, having too much sugar. It's a lot,
So if you have
caloric
too much sugar,
right.
or you're not working out,
It's a variety of reasons.
because if you're not working out, your muscles are not asking for it, so they won't be as sensitive to the signal,
Right?
right?
Right.
Or if you're having too much sugar, that means it's more than the muscle can get, so it'll need more.
Correct.
Okay.
So it's a combination of intake and spend. right? It's like a bank account. Right?
Yeah.
So if your intake is always too high, you're always overloading your body with that signal, and it just becomes insensitive to.
And that's the main cause for insulin resistance.
That is
Too much intake of sugar.
Lifestyle-related decisions are part of it, but there is also a genetic component.
There is.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
There's definitely a genetic predisposition. Some people are more predisposed to developing insulin insensitivity.
Right. Gotcha. Yeah.
So
yeah.
for
Like
example,
smokers. Some smokers get sick quicker. Some smokers don't. It's
some
just-
people
yeah.
can smoke until they're 95 and not
I know a
develop lung
couple.
cancer.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, you could take, for example, and this is well known, you could take a Caucasian person
Right.
who's enormous and heavy, morbidly obese.
Yeah.
But if you take their bloods, they will actually look metabolically fine.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you could. I mean, I'm not saying this is the rule.
No, I mean,
You can find
could
that.
that happen?
Absolutely, yeah. And then you can have a South Asian who doesn't look obese at all, maybe a little bit of excess adiposity,
Visceral, yeah.
but will be full-blown type 2 diabetic. So the thresholds are different across across gene pools, and so that's what makes the problem harder to solve, right? Because there's so much variability.
There's no theme.
There's no one size fits all. There's no magic bullet. You've got to treat every patient uniquely in their own journeys. Look, the good news is that it's not a death sentence.
Being diabetic.
Well, if you are a poorly controlled diabetic, it can become a
define
death
again what's
sentence.
poorly controlled.
Yeah, good question. So poorly controlled is the extent to which you are dysfunctional. So it's usually defined by how high your average blood sugar is.
Mhm.
And the most common measure of that is called hemoglobin A1C,
Okay.
which is, let's call it your sugar concentration.
Gotcha. Okay.
So think of it as like a glass of water, and I'm going to pour a certain amount of sugar in it and mix it up.
Right.
And then I'm testing the water to see what percentage of sugar's in it. It's kind of the same.
Okay.
So you've got a certain percentage of sugar in your blood, and it's an easy test. It's not a great measure, candidly, because it's not the best measure of control,
Okay.
but it's a cheap test. It's ubiquitous. Everyone has access to
It's
it,
basic.
and so everyone uses that.
Yeah.
And so if you were to do the test and your measurement is below 5.7%,
Okay.
you're considered metabolically normal,
Healthy. Okay.
healthy, whatever that means. If you're between 5.7% and 6.5, you're considered pre-diabetic or in the pre-diabetic
Okay.
range.
That's pre-diabetic.
Yeah.
Okay.
If you're above 6.5%, you're considered diabetic. If you're above 7%, you're considered a poorly controlled diabetic.
Oh, wow.
Okay. So when you're in that range, and part of the reason why this stratification happens, it's a risk stratification.
Yeah.
So in the poorly controlled diabetic strata, that's where the disease, or that's where the dysfunction leads to other more severe consequences.
Like?
So when you have a chronically elevated concentration of blood sugar, think of it as like tiny razor blades floating around your bloodstream, causing damage everywhere in your body. That's essentially what's happening. So you will have microvascular damage done across your circulatory system, and it can manifest in many different ways. It can manifest as a loss of nerve sensitivity in your foot. And that's why a lot of diabetics end up with peripheral neuropathy, which means their nervous system ceases to function well. They lose the sense of touch, the sense of vibration. So they'll end up stubbing their toe on a corner or stepping on a nail, and they won't notice, and it'll lead to infection. And the blood vessels have been damaged, so now the vascular supply is damaged. So it starts to get infected, it turns to gangrene, and that foot needs to get amputated.
Oh,
there's still a large number of amputations that happen. Imagine, in today's world, there are a lot of people that still get their legs and toes amputated because of poorly controlled diabetes, because it's been poorly controlled for so long. Around the heart, you can get calcification and blockage of the heart as a consequence of chronically elevated blood sugar and diabetes. Now everyone is focused on brain health, and all of the neurodegenerative conditions that have progressively gotten worse, Alzheimer's and dementia, and so on, are increasingly being linked to blood sugar levels to the extent that we're calling dementia type 3 diabetes.
Oh,
right. Blindness.
Yeah, I heard about that.
Yeah. So your eye is a fascinating window because it is the only place in the body that you can directly look at nerves and blood vessels
Through it.
through it.
Okay.
In the back of the eye, in the retina, you can directly look at blood vessels and nerves. In fact, your eye is an extension of your brain. It's
True.
part of your brain,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So it's a fascinating place. And one of the areas of science that we are most excited about is the AI applied to the eye. So computer vision
Yes.
around sort of retinal scans that can derive scores. So we implemented an AI a few years ago to basically do the retinal scan for diabetics on a routine basis to see if their eyes were healthy or not. But just a few months ago, we implemented an AI to calculate your calcium score of your heart
Through the
eye, which is incredible that you can do
wow.
that. Yeah. So it's fascinating. There's so much innovation happening in that space.
So you have those little razor blades that just goes around, just messes
Causing damage.
everything
Yeah.
everywhere. And that's the higher your, what do you call it? The glucose level or
The higher the concentration
of blood
Right.
sugar, the more razor blades
the more razor blades there
you
are
have
causing
in your,
damage.
they're
Yeah.
causing damage. Okay. And it goes all the way from amputations, all the way to blindness, to dementia, and everywhere in between.
Right. And so now it's easy to understand why it costs society so much.
Of course.
Amputations are expensive. Heart attacks are expensive. Blindness is expensive. It's expensive not only in terms of the direct cost of care, but also the consequences. And in our part of the world where so many young people suffer from diabetes, you get into questions about workplace productivity.
Yes,
and
yes. I was just going to
so
say the amount of
many
people that
layers.
just take leave or just not as productive, and or they are 10% of their productivity is just because of that.
Well, just think about the life of a diabetic. So if, God forbid, you ended up in a place where you're diabetic.
Okay. Well, how is that? Describe it to me, because honest to God, I have no one from my family, thank God, alhamdulillah, that has this type of severe diabetic or even remotely diabetic. So I'm not really familiar of living with someone with these kind of conditions.
You're lucky. Most people do. I mean, almost everyone nowadays has a loved one who's suffered from diabetes or its complications. And so let me walk you through that.
Yes.
So,
a day in the life of a diabetic person.
well, let's start with a pre-diabetic.
Yeah.
Day in the life of a pre-diabetic. You know what that looks like?
Okay.
Just like your life. You can't tell.
Oh,
There's no indication.
that's
unless,
dangerous.
unless you go and get screened, you would otherwise never know that you were pre-diabetic. Unless you're reading certain other signals, like you're gaining weight a little bit or you're a bit slower than usual, but there's no real manifest, oh gosh, I think I'm pre-diabetic.
There's no symptoms.
No symptoms, right? Even diabetes itself in its early days
Mhm.
is typically not symptomatic. Diabetes becomes symptomatic very late. That's why it's so pernicious. That's why it's so dangerous. And what are the symptoms?
Mhm.
Oftentimes, people will present initially because they're like, oh gosh, I'm peeing a lot. And I'm getting up at
Is
night
it?
to pee. Yeah. Yeah. Nocturnal urination. And the frequency of nocturnal urination is one of the most common initial symptoms that
Indications that you have to get checked for
Correct.
diabetes. Okay, so
So-
that's one.
But if you get to that point, you are already
Oh no.
really poorly controlled. You're already very far down the road, and a lot of damage has been
What
done.
about kind of general fatigue, sort of, you know,
Yes.
ability to function properly, get up
brain
the-
fog,
Yeah.
fatigue, all of this is there.
Mm.
But most people, they just shrug it off to, oh, I'm tired, I didn't sleep well, right? So it's not like, it's not an obvious thing.
That's an obvious symptom. You
Right.
just get a couple of, you know, espressos and
Yeah.
you're
Look,
okay.
back pain is back pain. Once it happens, you know it happens.
Yeah,
You'll get physio done.
true.
But diabetes is dangerous because they call it the silent killer. You will not be able to track it unless you are regularly testing yourself. And unfortunately, this is a conversation we can get to that's going to get me into some hot water, because the system is not designed.
What system?
Our system is not designed,
Like what?
insurance, the way we pay for things. And so it's not designed to help you catch those things because it's not in anyone's interest to help you catch those things.
What's the reason for that?
Money? Follow the money. Always follow the money.
But that's the worldwide sort of pharmaceutical, medical.
Not necessarily
Drop.
pharmaceutical. It's more about risk and how we pay for risk and how we pay for the mitigation of risk.
Mm,
So when you buy health insurance,
yeah.
the expectation from the insurance company is that next year you're going to go to another insurance company, right? And then the next year, that insurance company is going to make the same assumption that you will churn. And fair enough, churn rates are high because we buy insurance in a very price sensitive and very stupid way. But the consequence of that is that no insurance company is really going to want to find out if you're pre-diabetic, because once they do find out, they have a duty of care to treat that. And that costs money. And the ROI on reversing your prediabetes is negative, because the benefit comes a decade from now and you will no longer be their customer. So these incentives are flawed because insurance contracts are so short, right? So when we think about risk on a decade plus level, then interests are aligned.
Of course, yeah.
But when we think about risk on short timelines, people don't want to invest in the long-term thing. And so prediabetes, you might be pre-diabetic for half a decade or more before you become diabetic. You might be diabetic for many years before you know you're diabetic, unless you go proactively and screen yourself. And I suggest everyone listening should go do that. It's so easy. And by the way, what's super ironic about it is that everyone has the benefit. Every insurance company is mandated by the government to cover diabetes screening.
Oh, so everyone has an insurance can do it today?
The regulator, the government,
Yeah.
that wants the population to be healthy, has told all the insurance companies you have to have diabetes screening as a standard benefit.
Can't you do it at home?
Well, it's a blood test.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean,
So you have that machine that kind of.
yeah, you could, but I wouldn't, yeah, you could do that. I mean, you could test your fasting blood sugar if you had the machine.
Yeah.
But it's probably easier for most people just to go to a clinic, because
there's
many other biomarkers that you want to test in addition to just your blood sugar.
Yeah.
And so, and most people have an annual health check as part of their benefit.
Yes.
But gosh, life gets in the way, doesn't it? We don't have time. You got to leave work. You got a babysitter. You got to battle traffic. The clinic's on the other side of town. Life gets.
Last time I did it 5 years ago, so don't go there.
Okay, so I'm booking you in tomorrow.
I should
to come into the clinic.
All of our families just should go there. But
yeah, 100%.
So listen, let me go back to the original point of. So we talked about the ramifications, the repercussions, the results, the kind of consequences of all of those sort of elements of whether it's pre-diabetic, diabetic, or what's the third one you said? The poorly controlled diabetic. So I have these three levels.
And by the way, in Abu Dhabi, for example, where there's data that's been published, 75% of the diabetic population in Abu Dhabi is poorly controlled.
Oh, wow. That's crazy.
It's crazy. Now, why is that?
Exactly. Let's go there. Why is that? What's the root causes for, what's the causes for diabetes?
Okay, let's break that down. Genetics.
Yeah.
Okay. Have we evolved as a society, as humans, as a species? Have we evolved genetically since the 1950s? No. Our genes are the same.
No, absolutely.
Okay, so getting from where we were in the 1950s with single-digit incidence rates of diabetes to where we are today with high, sort of double digits diabetes. It's not only a genetic thing.
It can't be. Yeah.
Okay. So it is the manifestation of those genetics, correct?
Right.
Okay. What contributes?
So we tapped into something that was hidden, probably.
Right. Something there.
Probably. Yeah.
In the way that we're wired and the way that we're programmed.
Gotcha.
Right. So what defines how we manifest our genetics?
Okay.
Well, that's easy.
Mm-hmm.
It's the sum aggregate of all of the decisions that we make throughout our lives.
Okay.
Right? Decisions about food, decisions about sleep, decisions about fitness, right? All of these decisions in a little tiny microscopic way influence your metabolic health or dysregulation.
Absolutely.
And so when you aggregate that over a lifetime, so a lifetime of suboptimal choices, it can lead you to manifesting that genetic predisposition that you have.
So that's a primary cause or root cause.
Well, it is
for
a strong contributor, a very strong contributor.
Okay.
Right?
Okay. Is it the strongest? Would you say?
I would say it is the strongest, and it's the one that we have the power to change.
So is there a direct correlation between my poor lifestyle and decisions across the years for, I don't know, before I was even able to make decisions for my family, giving me the lollipops and the French fries and all of that sort of stuff, all the way into my teens and 20s where I just go and eat out and just double down on the cakes and the kunafa and all of that, all the way until
That's why it breaks my heart when I go to Mall the Emirates
Oh,
and I
goodness
see
me, I don't-
these
I can't.
9-year-old kids that are just
I can't.
morbidly obese because they're doomed.
You go to Shake Shack and you see those kind of 9-10-year-olds with a double burger
Yeah.
each, and I'm like, I can't do that. I can't eat that. Where do they have the space to eat that? And they're like obese to a point where it really makes you sad.
And these are the things, right? And so how do we fix that? And a lot of that is way beyond my pay grade. Am I gonna-
Fixing is, so we'll come to fixing.
Yeah.
I need to focus now on the why.
On the why.
Yeah, so we started with, let's say, a really long chain of poor lifestyle or decisions made, whether you made it or not.
Yeah.
Just the way you do you said workout, diet, and
Just make it very generic. The way that we react to our environment, whatever
Okay.
that environmental input might be,
okay,
right? So you have an environment, and that environment is affecting you.
Yeah.
And you have a choice of how you interact with that environment.
Yeah.
And so, look, I ask a lot of people this question: is that why is it the incidence rate of diabetes and obesity and overweight has gone up so much
Mhm.
in the last 50 years?
Yeah.
It's not because of our genetic makeup changing.
we didn't mutate.
We didn't mutate. And
Yeah.
so I'll ask this question open-ended. I'll ask it in conferences and big groups. I'll ask healthcare people, non-healthcare people.
Okay.
And I always get the same answer.
Uh-huh.
And the answer is some version of, oh, I know the answer to that. It's super easy. Obviously, we're not sleeping well. We're not eating the right stuff. Big food is shoving Doritos down our throats. And
Okay.
we lead stressful lifestyles and modern life, basically, right?
Yeah.
It's-
Which is the poor choices.
Poor
and lifestyle.
choices.
Yeah.
and that's not incorrect. These are all valid points.
Right.
But then I'll reframe that answer back to the audience and I'll say, okay, what you've just done is you've entirely blamed the patient, i.e. the patient's not eating well, the patient's not sleeping well, the patient's not managing their stress, the patient's not exercising, the patient.
Okay.
Is that fair?
Okay.
Rhetorical question. Is it fair to blame the patient
If it's
for
his
all
or
those
her- if
choices?
it's his or her doing, okay. So I'm really interested and intrigued. If it's his or her choice, like for
If
example,
it's his or her choice, can we blame the patient for making that choice? Or should we?
it's okay. So this is a very deep philosophical sort of thinking process and epistemology here, because it's the same logic that says, can I blame a killer for being homicidal or sort of a killer for killing because he was abused when
As
he
a
was a
child.
child? And that's the same philosophical logic, right? So what's your thought on that?
It might be different than murder in this case.
It's the same.
But-
That's what I say. It's
Yeah.
the same logic. Yeah.
But I don't think that we can blame the individual.
No,
Because-
don't get me wrong there.
Yeah.
I'm all for that. I subscribe to that thinking process. I'm just sharing my logic with you
Right.
because I do subscribe to that, because sometimes it's unfair to do 100% let's sort of finger pointing or to accuse only that person and consider that person is abstract from reality,
Right.
because life doesn't work that way. We're not machines.
Correct.
Yeah.
And it comes down to a notion of where agency lies.
Gotcha. Okay.
So when people say the patient, what they're never saying is, well, the healthcare system isn't helping the patient making better decisions.
healthcare. But
Well,
healthcare comes later, isn't it?
Or the ecosystem.
The ecosystem,
So the
okay.
question is, where does agency lie? Okay,
Gotcha.
let me abstract it a little bit. And we were talking about this earlier, right? This notion of career and progression and building a life.
And
And you've-
meritocracy and kind of
Right. And so, you've had your own transition, right?
Right.
Corporate life to an entrepreneurial life.
yeah,
And you got to a point where you had the agency to make that choice.
true.
And today, you know what the roadmap is. In
True.
order for you to build a successful business, you need to do this and this and this and hire these people and raise this capital. And there's a roadmap.
Absolutely.
And the fact that there's a roadmap empowers you to take the risk,
Awareness, you mean, of the road.
the awareness of the roadmap,
Gotcha.
the availability of that roadmap,
100%.
and the
Oh gosh.
power that you have to execute.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Let's go back to food.
Yes.
And I like using this example because I love chocolate cake. I don't know if you like chocolate cake, but my wife makes an incredible
Who doesn't?
chocolate cake from scratch. And, when it comes out of the oven and it's, and it's fresh and it's hot and like the
fluffy,
aroma
it's-
fluffy, and you cut that like perfect triangular
I
slice.
didn't have lunch yet,
and
so
it's coming, that perfect slice, and the aromas are coming out, and you can smell it. And then someone hands
Stop.
you a glass of cold milk.
just stop.
I'm gonna give you the cold milk, and then I'm gonna hand you a fork. Okay, so let's pause.
Right.
Is your mouth watering?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Okay, I'll tell you what. My wife, if you're listening, you got to make me that right now. What?
So your mouth is watering. There's no chocolate
Absolutely.
cake here.
Yeah.
I've just
No.
used words. And in less than 30 seconds, I've changed your neurochemistry.
Yeah. No, I'm 100%. I
Right?
subscribe to that.
So what neurochemistry have I changed?
Mhm.
This is the dopamine cycle that's now been
Yep.
activated.
the reward
we're-
system, yeah.
We're wired that way.
Yep.
Right? And this gets back to the question of how we're wired with respect to legacy too. We're wired to seek reward.
Yes.
And our brains are really good at chasing that.
Yep.
Okay. And it leads to all kinds of other stuff, obsessive compulsive behaviors, smoking, drinking, and so on. Now, if in the moment that I hand you that fork and that nice cold glass of milk, and you're really eager to dig into that cake, I say, hey, tell me, what is the net present value of all future risk
Mm.
associated with eating that cake?
So the kind of delayed gratification or delayed sort of consequences.
Or consequences at all. Like eating this cake is clearly not good for your metabolic health, probably. So what's the consequence? Quantify it for me.
Right.
Quantify the sum aggregate effect of all of your food choices.
Mm.
We're not wired to do the math. We're not smart enough. We don't have enough data.
We're lazy to do the math, let's say.
It's hard. I mean, no one can do the math.
We don't do the hard thing because we're lazy. That's the thing. I mean, we do the easy thing. We go through the path of least resistance because we're lazy.
Look,
And that's how it is, right?
I try to have a little bit more, I try to give humanity a bit more benefit of the doubt and not chalk it up to just pure laziness.
Is it
'Cause I think-
dangerous?
I think all of us have,
Because don't you give excuses for people who can be hedonic? Because my kind of, and this is where my mind works, and I know that I'm a bit on the kind of fringe outlier sort of way of thinking on this, but I get triggered by the notion of discipline, right? And discipline is only activated when in how do I say it, in situations specifically like this, where I'm absolutely and unequivocally sure that I want the thing, but then I'm able to see and be aware and clear about the instant gratification versus the delayed gratification, whatever that is, and know that which one is which, and then make a choice. And if I'm able to make the right choice, then I'm disciplined. And what does right mean in the context of what we're saying? Being diabetic, being healthy, being. If I'm aware of that, the challenge is now. If I'm aware of it and I still make the bad decision, then you know what? It's fine. Go, die. It's your choice, but don't complain. The where I sort of, my mind kind of gets a bit more empathetic and sympathetic is with someone who doesn't know and it's not aware, because like you said, they've been like I've read the other day a book called The Longevity Paradox, How to Die Young at a Very Old Age, right? And he said that most of those diseases that were always labeled as genetic, probably they have, but they're not genetic at all from a direct correlation perspective. Meaning, if your father or mother is diabetic,
you don't have to be.
You don't have to be,
Correct.
and you can absolutely, it's not genetic. It's not like you have to be.
It's not ordained.
Exactly. It's not the DNA. Yeah. It's not like boldest, or eye color. It's not that, right?
Well, you can always go to Turkey there. You can,
well, I could. I mean, I was just speaking to a friend of mine yesterday. I was like, you got to go there. I was like, nope, I'm not going to go there. But hey, listen, that train has passed. I'm married with kids. Hey, whoever wants me, I'm not available. But the point is, the point that I'm trying to make is, it's not, but every time these things happen, whether it's glaucoma, whether it's diabetes, whether it's blood pressure, whatever, the first question they ask you is your father or is your mother or do you have a family history? And the book argues that the question is not wrong,
It's
but
not complete.
it's not complete.
Right.
Because it's not because of the DNA or the genetic effect. It's because, oh, your father is that, therefore your household's decision and lifestyle is bad and you've inherited those behaviors. And therefore, you don't know any better. So if I'm raised in a, let's say, in a household that eats kunafa after every meal,
Yeah.
or eats mansaf and then kunafa, and then afterwards we have atayef, and then we have all of those delicacies and, chocolate cake and chocolate mousse and cheesecake and all of that sort of stuff, almost daily basis. How would I know? And then I'll grow up, by my 20s, I'm already diabetic probably. And then I have to reverse everything, starting with the mindset and the awareness. Because now I'm not trained. I'll be sore every time I try to be disciplined. Whereas if I'm raised in a household where discipline is the name of the game, then it's easy for me to be disciplined. And it's easy for me to judge others who are not disciplined, if that makes sense. And that's where the sympathy and empathy in my mind goes into the way you're describing how societal impact and ecosystem is sort of, I wouldn't say, like, I know what you're saying. It's unfair to blame only and specifically at 100% the patient. And that's why I subscribe to that thinking process.
Look, I think we need to be careful around this notion of discipline or lack thereof, because implicit in that is some judgment that you're judging, because discipline is a characteristic.
Okay.
Right? It's a trait.
Yeah.
You're either disciplined or you're not disciplined.
Yeah.
And that imbues
Is it?
a certain, I think so.
You can't learn to be disciplined?
Well, we have to define what learning means, because I can learn math, but then not
Like
be
being
good at doing
coached,
it, right?
being so you can be a novice, you can be a mediocre, and you can be a master. So, and that takes time, deliberate practice, intentionality, and supervision and coaching from outside. So it's like
Let me take it to an extreme.
right.
I can read in a book how to be a great basketball player, but because of my Iranian genetics, I will never be in the NBA. So there's a difference between learning about discipline.
But you can be good at basketball
Well,
if you want to. You can't. You probably won't make it to the NBA. I'm judging by the gray hair that you've passed that stage. But if you're a 15 or a 12-year-old,
yeah.
nothing would stop you from actually dreaming and probably making it to the NBA.
No, something would stop me.
What?
Here, genetics would stop me for
Like
sure.
what?
Well,
Height?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well,
I mean,
there are NBA players who are not.
there are,
tall.
but on a probabilistic basis, the
Right.
likelihood-
Yeah. That's what I'm trying to say. But
Yeah.
okay, so I know that's an extreme example, and you
Yeah.
used to make a point. But my point is, you could be good at basketball.
You could absolutely be good at
Yeah.
basketball.
Well, that's
But back to the sort of the core, the crux of what discipline is.
Mhm.
I feel that discipline is more of it's a choice and it's a characteristic, but it's not available to everybody.
Yes, 100%. By the way, I agree with you.
Yeah.
Some people have DNA or they're lucky that their brains are wired to being disciplined, and that also is not a direct correlation to parenting, because you can have two
Kids. Yeah.
For example, Arnold Schwarzenegger. I don't know if you know his brother. He was super disciplined. His brother wasn't, to the point that his brother actually committed suicide
Because
because
I know that.
he couldn't. I mean, it's in his documentary and books.
Mm.
So, two brothers, same family, same household. One extremely disciplined to the point that he did everything under the the sun, including acting and being a politician and Mr. Olympia and all of that sort of stuff. His brother failed so miserably that he actually committed suicide. So that's what I'm trying to say. I 100% subscribe to your kind of way of analyzing and seeing things. So that's a fact.
The question then becomes, can you help someone earn or learn discipline? And I think this gets back to this notion of agency. So, and again, back to the example of you building your own company. You have the power to take that risk and to make that choice because you feel like you have agency. And I think the most accurate answer to why we are so metabolically dysfunctional, despite the information being out there.
Yes.
Everyone knows that having,
Too much sugar is bad. Yeah.
Fruit Loops every morning is going to kill you. Everyone knows. Like we all know that.
You're not having Fruit Loops every day.
Oh, no,
Okay,
I used
good.
to love those. Yeah. I think, the information is there. The knowledge is there. And, you could frame it as, well, people choose to ignore it or people choose to be lazy. I don't think that's actually it. I think that people lack the agency to understand how to lead the better life, but more importantly, how to achieve the outcome.
What is agency?
Agency is power over your own destiny,
Okay.
simply.
Okay.
So you can have agency in your career, i.e., I want to become CEO of the company. If I know how to get there, I've got agency over that process. If I'm in a job, for example, where I don't know whether my line manager is going to give me a good promotion, a good performance review or not, I have no idea I'm going to get a promotion or not. I feel completely lost and I have no power over that process. I lack agency. I'm likely to leave that job.
Okay.
If I'm in a school where the professor is unfair in grading or marking my papers and I don't know how I'm going to progress academically, I won't feel empowered with agency over my own educational journey, right? So everything that we
But
do
you
in
have an
life,
agency to leave, for example.
you have agency to leave in
Right.
those contexts, but you can't leave your body,
Yeah.
right? And so that's why we're stuck
Yeah.
in this piece of meat that we're living.
Yes.
And so to give people agency over their bodies that they cannot divorce themselves from is actually the crux of the matter. How do you give people agency? How do I sit across from the table from you when you've got that cake in front of you and give you the knowledge around the metabolic impact that cake would have and do that at scale sort of across your life so that every single decision that you come to, you will feel empowered to make the right decision. Does that make sense?
Yes. So let me give you this example. I am sitting at home. I have a choice to either go to the gym or not. Okay, forget about the gym. Do push-ups or even squats or just jumping jacks, star jacks or whatever that I can do at home, or sit at my couch or on my couch and watch Netflix. Do I have agency to choose between both?
You do have agency. To
Okay.
choose. I mean,
Is there anything that could stop me from actually staying on my couch or doing push-ups and squats instead?
Yes.
What can stop me?
Your brain chemistry.
Okay. Do I have control over that?
You don't.
Okay.
In that moment, you don't, right? It's hard. Once these things have been wired in, you don't actually have control. And that's why we have people with gambling habits and people with smoking habits. These people understand that these behaviors are bad.
Then why is there a quote unquote legal system that judges people based on their actions and behavior?
God, that's above my pay grade. I'm just a healthcare guy.
That's the easiest answer, right?
I deal with people who eat too many cookies.
Listen, you're like an academic. When you ask a difficult question, it depends. And then, you know what?
Yeah, I mean, look, medical legal questions and legal questions are probably similar in some ways, but like
it's like when you have the look, I get that it's not easy, but to kind of completely discount it and say that it doesn't exist, I don't mind that thinking process. It's just that I feel that the logic falls apart at a very early stage of that discussion. And this is where I'm really interested in that. I'm not sitting here. I'm not going to sit here and start fighting or arguing. I'm not about arguing. I'm about really understanding, because I've read your profile and I've researched you really well. And I know that one of the main things that you're trying to do is change behaviors, right? So am I, at all levels, right? When it comes to business, when it comes to lifestyle, society and everything in between, education. I can give not excuses. I can give explanations, but explanations are not excuses, if that makes sense. So, or justification. So the fact that you're able to explain something does not define
does not excuse it.
Does not excuse it. Exactly. That's the point.
Yeah.
So if I have a daughter now, and I do have a daughter who is 16 now, and she's finishing her IGCSEs. And she's disciplined, she's working, I give her agency, I'm not on her head. And I can see that she's always playing games. If I have the thinking process of, oh, I know all of these game developers, they have psychologists who hack the brain with the triggers of influence that can sort of drag people through the dopamine cycles of, reward system, that da 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 da.
Yeah.
How can I help her?
Take away the iPad.
Okay, good.
I mean, if you know that that's the case, and that
Good.
probably is the case, right?
Yeah,
You remove that from the environment. Okay, so let's bring that back to the diabetic.
gotcha.
If we know that the diabetic who's already 3 decades into the journey that led him to be diabetic
Yes.
is going to have a very difficult time fighting their neurochemistry,
Mhm.
right? The dopamine cycle. It's extremely hard. Willpower does not exist. And that's why we got to be very
It's
careful. Not in that context. No, it's easy.
Oh, not in that moment.
Not in that moment.
Okay, gotcha.
right?
Oh, yeah, I agree.
For people that have willpower, for people that have discipline,
It's easy for them to
it's
judge.
easy for them to
Yeah.
to judge,
Yeah.
and it's hard for them to empathize.
Yes.
But I not only have empathized with my own patients, I've been through the journey myself. When I opened GluCare, and I've talked about this in other podcasts, I was myself pre-diabetic. I was almost obese.
Were you?
I had high fatty liver, high cholesterol, high uric acid. This is your podcast audience isn't going to have the benefit of seeing this picture unless you stitch it in. But I'll show you. I'll show you because a picture's worth 1,000 words. There you go.
You were pre-diabetic.
Oh yeah, this is me when I opened GluCare.
No way.
Yeah.
I will put this on.
Yeah. So that guy.
That has nothing to do with you. Oh, goodness
Correct.
me. Okay.
And so
well done.
well done. Don't congratulate me too fast
Why?
because I failed the first time. I went from that to that in 6 months. Okay. And I was helped by tools.
Yes.
So you
Yes.
wanna-
Okay.
so-
Yeah. We need help. That's what I'm trying to say. I mean, that's why I said in that moment, I 100% agree
Yeah.
with you.
We need help.
Yes.
What the help comes in various forms.
Yeah.
And so now we get to talking about the tools.
Yes.
What are the tools?
Yeah.
Well, right now everyone's heard of Ozempic and Mounjaro, and there's a long list of GLPs coming behind that. Incredible drugs. We were the first clinic in the world to get Mounjaro outside the United States.
But just a second. Why do we take about post, how they say it, medicines and not preventions?
It's not either or.
Okay.
It's not either or. Actually, the medicines are part of the prevention.
Mm.
So I prevented myself from becoming diabetic by using the appropriate medicines.
What about the life choices that you could have made?
But that's also part of it, right?
Okay.
I'm not a purist about any of this stuff. There are people that will sit here and say, all of this can be done with lifestyle alone and behavior change alone.
Could it?
Possibly for some people,
Okay.
but nothing's absolute. Everyone is on a spectrum, and you have to hyper-personalize your approach to every single patient.
But if there's one advice you would give to someone, what would that be?
If there's one advice that I would give, to who? To a
person
diabetic?
who are pre-diabetic or diabetic.
Gosh. Number one,
Like one
Yes.
advice, just do one thing.
fix your sleep.
Ooh, sleep.
Mm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can see that.
That's probably number one.
But to fix your sleep, you have to work out because you have to sleep.
Exactly.
And you have to eat well, and you have.
Exactly.
I like that. That's smart. That's very smart. Hats off.
Yeah. So that's the one thing. And that's why,
Okay.
we partnered with Aura a while ago. We were their first clinical partner
Mm.
because we understand the power of sleep. And these
Yeah,
guys
if
are really
if you
good.
go into the REM sleep and the deep sleep properly, you regenerate, and you can't go there if you're not working out. Or you're not
Correct.
having.
Everything connects to it. Yeah. Obesity is a byproduct of, there's just so many ways that you can, springboard off.
So I'll tell you what. Before we go, because I'm really interested in going deeper into those sort of whether prevention or elements of cure or sort of fixing the
Mhm.
problem. What's the one thing that our viewers now are getting wrong about diabetes, fitness, and health?
That's a good question. I won't answer. I don't know what people are getting wrong,
Hmm.
but maybe I'll say what direction that we seem to be going that I think is wrong. there's a lot of noise now around health span and longevity and so on. I don't even like the phrase longevity. To me, longevity is just marketing. It's a word
Yeah.
that we invented
Yeah.
to talk about healthcare, but with optimism,
Yes.
right? Where there's
Yes.
still some hope.
It's like a respent. Yeah.
It's like healthcare with hope, where, we're setting, traditional healthcare aside because it sucks, and we're talking about what's left, and then calling that longevity. At the end of the day, longevity is good preventive healthcare that maximizes your healthy lifespan. Okay,
Yes.
fine.
Healthy lifespan. I like
Healthy
that.
lifespan,
I like
yeah.
that.
And so there's a lot of noise, and I get so many questions, at dinner parties and various places, even in the elevator from time to time, like, oh, should I be on metformin? Should I take NAD plus? There's rapamycin. Yeah, there's all kinds of stuff, and it's stem cells,
Pills and
pills and injections, and
Oh, wow.
all kinds
Okay.
of stuff.
why would people ask that?
Well, because there's TikTokers and Instagrammers and people talking about it.
Right.
Yeah, there's a lot now, a lot of content out there in the public domain about various ways to hack your health. Being a biohacker is no longer like a fringe thing.
What does that mean?
What do you
Hack
mean?
your life?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't like the phrase, but it's used a lot.
Yeah. What does it mean in the pop culture?
It just means, being more focused on fine tuning your body from a performance enhancement perspective.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
Hacking your body, hacking your
whatever you want that be. If you're an athlete, then in
Correct.
sports. If you're in productivity, then being alert and focused.
Yeah, so
okay, gotcha. Yeah.
performance hacking used to be the domain of people who were on some trajectory on performance, like athletes.
Like bodybuilders.
Bodybuilders, runners, whoever. But now that's broadened to people who are hacking health span. I want to live longer. Okay. And so there's all these various tools that people are exploring for helping them do that. Now, a lot of those things have merit. A lot of them don't. There's a lot of noise. It's very difficult if all you're following is TikTok.
Yeah. And that's why you keep getting asked in the elevator.
Yeah, exactly. About what is the evidence. And and there is evidence for some stuff, but before we get to any conversation about all of this exogenous, stuff that you could do, the 5 pieces of advice, not the one piece of advice, but the 5 pieces of advice that I give people is, before you go down any of those rabbit holes, you got to do 5 things. You got to eat whole foods, which is not as easy as it sounds.
What is whole foods?
Non-processed foods.
Okay.
Things that don't come in a package.
Something that is perishable.
Something that's, well, not necessarily, but something that has not gone through some industrial factory process. Yeah.
Okay.
And not all forms of processing are bad. That in and of itself is a dangerous
But that's one
generalization,
thing, yeah.
Number 2 is treat sleep like a job.
Right. It's a superpower, isn't it?
Treat sleep like a job, like you have KPIs and performance evaluations.
8 to 5.
Yeah, exactly. It's your job at night, literally. Number 3 is lift heavy things.
Good.
And do that to almost a point of failure.
Resistance,
That's resistance training, but in a very specific way that most people have never done. And it's hard to do because you're also prone to injury if you do it wrong.
Right. Yeah.
So that is probably, of the 5, the most inaccessible to most people, unless you have guidance or a trainer or somebody that can help you.
Yeah.
The 4th thing is walk frequently, ideally after meals, and make that a community thing. Do it with somebody, right? Because the community piece is also important. And then the last one, which we all ignore, is manage your stress actively.
Oh, okay.
Right? So whether that's meditation or yoga or whatever. So these 5 things, generally speaking, are accessible to most people. 2 of those things will cost money. Eating whole foods is more expensive than eating cheap processed foods. And training effectively will cost money.
Yes.
But by and large, it's accessible. You can make it work. You don't have to go and spend a few thousand dirhams a month on some,
gym membership or
right?
Yeah.
That's my advice, is like, do the basics. Once you've mastered the basics, that's your 80-20. You've captured the lowest hanging fruit of health span and longevity just by doing that. Far more than any of this other esoteric stuff. And in fact, I like focus on sleep, but most people, when you ask them the one question thing, it's actually exercise, right? So the single greatest drug, if you think of it as a drug, is skeletal muscle mass. So the more you can maintain your skeletal muscle mass as you age, that is very highly correlative to a long and healthy lifespan, so health span.
And that's through resistance and workout. Resistance training.
All forms of exercise are beneficial, but in the context of this specific thing, skeletal muscle mass, it is resistance training. So
lifting,
playing tennis is great for cardiac health. Walking is great. Running is great, but
cycling and so on.
That's all great for cardiac health and circulatory health.
But that's not what you're talking about.
No,
here.
what I'm talking about is resistance training to build and maintain skeletal muscle mass, which is your metabolic engine, so to speak, right?
Oh yeah, because it consumes sugar a lot. Okay,
correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But back to this point of discipline, it's very, very hard to break that. And that's what makes solving this problem extremely difficult. And the introduction of these medications, GLPs, has been miraculous, honestly.
Isn't that materialistic in your opinion?
What?
The fact that you think that you don't have as much agency or control over your life except with pills and things that can hack your stuff. Isn't that materialistic and removes or discounts the
innate human willpower?
What makes us exactly human power?
We are flawed.
We are
not perfect.
But then I'll tell you, look at the difference, for example, and now it's a funny time to mention that, but between, for example, the East and the West, China and the US, right? Look at how the East are disciplined in their almost everything they do, to the point that their kids are almost always gymnasts and they're pianists and they're violinists, and and they're elderly, or a 7-year-old can do a muscle up or can do a handstand push up and so on and so forth.
But that might be information bias too, because from an absolute number sense, the largest number of diabetics on the planet is in China. Yeah, I mean, on a relative basis, the proportion is lower, but there's still plenty of dysfunctional folks in China.
Yeah. Right? But I mean, the thing is, I don't know if this is right or wrong, and I'm curious to hear your thought on this. If one can do it, then everyone can do it.
No.
Why?
It's not that egalitarian. It's like saying if everyone can run a 100-meter dash under 10 seconds, then
not that well. I mean, okay, so
I'm going to the extreme.
Okay,
right?
so if they train for 5 years with super disciplined, deliberate coaching from a professional, won't be able to do it?
I'll answer that by asking you a question. If you weighed 300 pounds when you woke up tomorrow morning, would it be as easy and straightforward for you to go about your day?
Absolutely not.
Right. And so when patients get to that point, I shouldn't say patients, when people get to that point, literally carrying the baggage. Let's call it baggage.
Yes.
And the baggage is in many forms. There's mental baggage. And that's neurochemistry. How do you modulate your neurochemistry? No one knows how to do that directly. That's so hard, but that's there. That's the biggest form of baggage. And then there's the physical baggage that you can see, which is the weight. Okay. Now, these drugs can help us get rid of the physical baggage very quickly. You saw in my photo, I took Ozempic to get to that point. And it does so by blocking the mental baggage temporarily. That's how it's working, right? So there is an effect on the dopaminergic pathways that takes away the compulsion of eating. So when you're on these medications, the food noise goes away. You no longer care about food. What's
the side effects of that?
Look, the side effects are mostly gastric discomfort, nausea, diarrhea. It's not pleasant. When I was on these medications at the highest dose that I got to, it wasn't fun for a couple of weeks. I was lethargic and tired, largely because I wasn't eating anything. But you adapt. For some people, the side effects are so bad that they can no longer continue on the drugs. And that's about 10% of the population.
But there's no dangerous sort of critical.
Not that we know of yet. I mean,
is it safe? Remember,
it's generally considered safe.
Remember, something was on off the shelf, sort of not medications but pills. Hydroxycut, was it called? Hydroxycut.
Oh gosh, yeah, with amphetamines.
Yeah, and then they took it out because there was.
But that's happened many times. There was a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory called Vioxx.
Yeah,
Celebrex, Vioxx. These drugs were all in the same class. Of painkillers. These were all generally considered safe. But only one of them was pulled because after 30 years with millions of data points, they finally figured out that this one has a higher incidence of some adverse cardiac event. So look, you can never say that something's 100% safe.
That's what I'm trying to say, except discipline and choice. That's 100% safe.
I mean, I guess so. It's dangerous though, right? Because that's so abstract and so hypothetical. It's not real.
Is it?
It's not real. It's not in the real world.
Being disciplined isn't real. Okay, so here's a
It's
thought.
real for some people, and those people are very lucky.
Yeah, well, okay.
It's not real for most people.
Yes. I'll tell you.
You know what is a substitute? So here's a worthwhile response to that. If discipline is not real for everybody, or I should say, not available or attainable for everybody, is there a substitute? And I think there is.
To discipline.
Yes.
Okay, I'm interested. You got me interested.
Right? Is there a substitute?
I wouldn't know.
Community. Community is the substitute to discipline.
I would say community is not a substitute. It's actually a complement.
Yes, 100% it's a compliment. But in the case where
Actually,
discipline
it
is lacking,
augments. Well, okay. So in the case it's lacking, to catalyze, to the catalyst to discipline is community. And that's where we started, by having the family, the community,
Correct.
the tribe, the
Yeah.
society. And this is where it's very, very important. And, now things are kind of circling back and linking to each other. But at the same time, so it's very important, because if you're living in a society where you have no helps, very individualistic society, very, very capitalistic society, where everyone is to their own devices, no one is actually caring about everybody else, and people, just numbers walking around. Yeah, I get that. In that extreme, which exists on the face of the earth, yes, right? But then also, I say, because of the abundance of information, if I'm able to at least introspect, just have a moment of thinking, me and myself and my lifestyle. And there are people who, you see all sorts of transformation online, that are people that spend 2-3 years going down from 300 pounds all the way to really being a bodybuilder. Like, the cases are enormous. And now people are doing it for YouTube. But it's good. I'll tell you what, I'll take it. I'll take it.
Yeah.
But the point is, because you have, I know there's an extrinsic motivational factors and intrinsic motivational factors, whatever it is,
Yeah.
figure out yours. I think what I think agree with you on, and I really do, is that not everyone will have a strong intrinsic motivator that will drive their discipline.
And
But everyone will have,
more than that, even if someone did have it, life gets in the way.
I get that.
Right? Responsibilities.
Yeah,
kids,
I get that.
bills.
To be an Olympic athlete, but not to be at base level health.
Even base level health, man. Even that. Here, I'll give you an example. I don't want to be too specific, because I don't want to breach his confidentiality in a public sphere.
Right.
But someone within the school community, at my kid's school, I would see this individual every day, school drop-offs. And I would see him every year getting more and more obese. And I've become kind of like Neo in the Matrix, where he could see the Matrix.
Yeah.
I've gotten to a point where I can just see diabetes, like Neo.
You can
I
see
can
the
just see it.
zeros and
Yeah,
one.
I
Can see the lady in the red dress, right?
Exactly. And so, gosh, I wanted to talk to him, and it's awkward, right? I got to walk up to somebody and be like, "Hey, man, listen, you need to come see me at my clinic." I mean, it's a weird conversation to have with somebody, but I wanted to talk to him, and he was part of the staff at the school. And so one day, I had my chance. I was doing drop off. He was outside helping direct traffic. There was nobody around him. So I went up and I said, "Hey, man, listen, just wanted to pass an idea by you. I've got a metabolic health clinic. We do a lot of work around obesity, diabetes, and so on. Actually, I didn't mention obesity. I just said metabolic health. I'd love to, send my team, even myself, come to give the students a talk about awareness and metabolic health, even the teachers, even the community. Like, I'd love to give back
That's nice.
somehow to the school, because, I'm a parent here." So that was my opening, is like,
Right.
how can I give back to the ecosystem here? And he immediately opened up. He says, "Oh my gosh, what is your clinic?" And I said, "Well, it's GluCare, and we do this and that." And he says, "Oh my gosh, this is such interesting timing." I said, "Why?" He says, "Well, a week ago, I felt I was dying, because I've just gotten in such poor health." And he's huge. Yeah. Or he was. He's no longer.
Oh, wow. Well done.
And he says, "I felt like I was dying, and I went to the ER." He went to the ER of one of the prominent.
Actually?
Yeah, actually. Like he thought his life was ending. He just felt so bad. And he went to, I won't say names, he went to one of the prominent branded hospitals here, okay? And checked himself in with his complaints, long list of complaints. You know what they did? They said, oh, it might be cancer. Immediately. They scared him with it could be cancer kind of a thing.
And biopsy.
And then in his words, he says, I just bounced around that hospital for 2 days and they explored every orifice of my body. Every test that they could possibly bill my insurance for, they did.
Of course.
And at the end of that, they came back to him and they said, hey, good news. You don't have cancer. Well, bad news. You're a fully blown type 2 diabetic, way out of control. Here's some meds. You need to lose at least 30 kilos. Good luck. If you can't lose the weight, come back and we'll do a surgery. So he had just gone through that journey. And I said, look, I don't want to push or peddle or sell what we do, but I invite you anytime you want. Just come in. My team will take good care of you. And I just left it at that. That was pre-summer 1 year. This was 2 years ago, I think. A few months later, I'm in the clinic and the door of one of the dietitian's office was open and I see him inside. And he waves at me, he calls me down. I didn't recognize him.
You didn't?
No.
Oh, wow.
Not from his, because he was facing here, not from his profile.
No, that's what
and he was sitting next to his wife and he gets up and he says, Ali, I have to thank you. You saved my life. I said, I didn't do anything. My team has been helping you. Wow, what a transformation. Between he and his wife, in 6 months, they lost 60 or 70 kilos.
Wow.
Right? And without all the headache. And we even took him off medications, right? But the point is, this notion of discipline and agency, even in the context of the healthcare system, is elusive to many people because they get bad advice and bad guidance because the incentives are all wrong and so on and so forth. And so, it's not, we should be careful not to have a purely hypothetical conversation around anything, around discipline, around diet, around exercise. It really depends on context, depends on community. And like a big part of his transformational journey, like we got his diabetes under control in like 3 months and he lost an incredible amount of weight. Hopefully
Can someone get cured from diabetes?
No.
At all?
It's like cancer. You can be in remission. I would say, like, this is the language that we use. Some people use the language of, oh, we've reversed diabetes. No, you can reverse the clinical presentation of it. So someone can present biologically through their blood test as if they have a normal glycemic control.
Mm-hmm.
But the predisposition to what led them there in the first place will remain. And so once diabetic, always diabetic. And for the rest of your life, you should lead your life.
You should be aware that you're
100%. I'm more liberal in my language around prediabetes. So I will say we can reverse prediabetes, but diabetes, I'm very cautious to use that kind of terminology because I think it sets the wrong expectations.
So at a societal level, what behavioral change would you like to see? If you have a magic wand now, and you just boop, what would that be?
If I had a magic wand and I could change one thing to have the biggest impact on human health, at least in this part of the world, I would abolish the 1-year insurance contract.
Okay, say more.
The 1-year insurance contract is the impediment that leads to underinvestment in prevention.
Okay.
Because as long as the purse that controls the flow of money and the interests are misaligned, people will not be biased towards action.
What's the alternative?
Well, the alternative is that employers, or who owns risk over a longer period? Governments, employers, and the individuals themselves.
Yes.
They will have to, if you want to stick to a private medical insurance model, they will have to build into their relationship with their insurer expectations around prevention and maintenance, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that will cost money and someone's going to have to pay for it. So ultimately, someone has to pay for the activities that go into prevention. And if you just follow like pure economic principles, whoever benefits from that is the one that ideally should be paying for it. And so if an insurance company feels that you as a client, you're going to churn after 1 year, they're never going to feel like they're going to get the benefit, the ROI on prediabetes reversal. So in my case, right, I was not a specimen of good health. And the difference in lifetime cost is well documented. So on average, that guy that you saw, the fat guy,
Yeah,
you
how
saw,
much did it cost?
okay, how much would he have costed had he progressed?
Continued, yeah.
If I had become a poorly controlled diabetic
Yeah.
and lived the rest of my life
What's the
that way,
annual? What's the annual
I
expense?
would have cost over my lifetime, roughly on average, $500,000 more than the typical person.
That's a lot, and that's for per individual.
One person.
Oh goodness me!
Okay, that's U.S. numbers, but our numbers here are modeled largely on the
We're
U.S.
humans, yeah.
So how much did it cost me to reverse my prediabetes?
Yeah.
A few $1,000s. So my ROI was 150x.
Of course.
So my ROI was massive. And in my case, my insurance actually paid for most of my stuff. What was their ROI? Negative.
Yeah,
because I changed insurance. I changed insurance companies the next year. So they spent a few $1,000s.
What did you change?
Just I just went on a group plan. So I was on an individual plan, and then I changed to a group plan.
Right.
And so, I spent a few $1,000s on Ozempic, a bit on lab tests, a bit on
But
doctor
also,
visits.
if you're not sort of, if you're a healthy person,
Mhm.
or if you're a sick person, which one is more better for insurance? It's the healthy person, isn't it? Because you pay your insurance, but you're not.
Yeah. So I was one of those guys. I was the healthy person. I'm putting it in air quotes. Your listeners can't see my fingers. But I was the healthy person because I never had a claim. I was always too busy to kind of stay on top of my own care. And so
wow.
I was, in the eyes of the insurance company, I was healthy because I never initiated a billable event.
Claim, okay.
But that's not actually true, right? There was underlying unknown or unidentified risk,
Diabetic,
right?
Yeah.
So none of us are healthy, right? We all
Yeah,
are
yeah.
on some spectrum of health. There's no absolute health, right?
Agreed.
So we're all on that spectrum. It's incumbent on all of us to figure out where we are on that spectrum.
For that healthy, long life, the longevity.
And so at the end of the day, it comes down to all of us, man. We have to invest. Whether you have insurance or not, if it covers it or not, at the end of the day, the activity has to be done. You got to take the blood tests, you got to do the scans, you've got to speak to the physician, you've got to read, you've got to learn, you've got to understand. It takes time, it takes investment. And if you want to lead a long and healthy life,
Yeah.
you've got to, the resources are there, right? But there are certain things that have to be done. Now, if you lack the willpower, if you lack the discipline, there are complements to that.
Isn't that a way out? You're
What?
giving it a way out to people. It's like, I know a friend of mine
Yeah.
who was, I would say overweight. I don't want to say obese. So he was overweight.
Well, it's an objective thing. So if your BMI is over 30, you're considered obese. Now that doesn't work for bodybuilders. and so on.
but at least he had
Excess fat tissue.
excess fat tissue to a visibly kind of noticeable way, right?
Right.
Instead of working out, he actually did a lipo suction sort of operation, and now he's suffering because I think that's not a healthy way of losing fat. Because otherwise, instead of him disciplining himself for 2-3 years of just losing it slowly and gradually with workout and exercise, he said, you know what? Actually, this is what he said, Hari. He used to tell me that I can't do it. I'm like, what is it that you can't do? You can't. I'll tell you what. Just walk. Don't do anything else. Start with walking, because he doesn't do anything.
Look, it's not that simple.
It is not. It is not. I'm sure it's not.
It's not that simple because it's such a.
That's where discipline come in. Discipline is when you do something, especially when you don't want to do it, isn't it?
Right, but it's not that simple. And discipline is
that's
not
what
a
I'm trying to
current.
say. If you're trying to change behavior across society, and then you have that leeway, the natural disposition of people is the path of least resistance. The biggest portion of people just go. Whereas if you say, you know what, if you do it, don't complain. This is how it is. These are the consequences. And no, it's not okay. Then people will still do it, but at least they won't find it as a quote unquote an excuse.
But who sets that rubric? Who sets that line?
Life is hard. It's not me or you. It's life. It's like, and that only happens with humans. Animals don't have a choice. Animals are programmed to do the right thing, unless, of course, they're domestic animals that you just feed them crap all the time. That's different. But I mean, look at animals. Animals are programmed. We're not. We have a choice, and that choice is a power that, whether we use it or not, it's our choice. You know what I mean? But the point is, if we don't choose to do it, my fear when I communicate to society that it's okay if you don't, the biggest majority of people being hedonic, the species we are, will just point at that and say, oh, it's like, I'll tell you what, it's like ADHD, self-diagnosed ADHD. I'll tell you what, I read about ADHD from now until the moon. I know for a fact, if I go now to a professional, he will diagnose me as type 3 ADHD, you know, because I'll be distracted literally just like that. But I refuse to succumb to that, right? Because I know that, okay, there's a difference between me living in Gaza right now. That's different completely, right? There's a difference between me living in Congo or living in the Philippines or me sitting in Dubai here. There's a difference. So I subscribe to that and I completely understand that. I'm talking about people who actually have a choice, but then say, oh, it's not my choice because of X, Y, Z and this and that. It's like, you know what? No, it's your choice. But fine, do the bad choice. I'm not telling you you're wrong. I'm gonna tolerate you doing the wrong choices. That's fine. And you know what? You're in my circles. That's okay. I'm not gonna judge you even. But then don't come and complain. And if you have a bad health, you have to bear the consequences of bad health and know that it's your choices. To me, that's the kind of framework.
Isn't that what already happens?
Yeah.
I mean, already people who haven't exhibited the choices that lead to a better life will feel the consequences of that later on. And that's
what when I asked you about the behavioral change in society, which both of us, I think, agree on, that's what we're trying to do.
I think where we differ is I don't discount, or rather, I don't avoid using the tools that will give somebody a shortcut. And there's a reason for that. Because I'm cautious to pass judgment on this notion of willpower and discipline in that transition point. So I believe people can get to a point where they have lost. They've lost the power, they've lost the agency, they've lost hope. And in that moment to say, you blame,
okay.
In that moment, that is.
So you convince me. I get you.
Look,
I get you.
Fair or not fair
is
a question of.
The thing is, I wouldn't make it off the shelf.
What do you mean?
That advice, I wouldn't make it an off-the-shelf advice that you can do this to yourself, right? So, so let's, point number one, no judgment. Whether you make the right choice or no choice or bad choice, no judgment. I'm with you on this 100%, right? You're now 300 kilos. You're eating Burger Kings and McDonald's every day, 6-7 times a day. You're doing whatever. No judgments. You and your life, your choices. It's fine. I'm not going to look down at you. I'm not going to judge you because that's who you are and that's fine. So I agree with you 100%. What I probably would discuss with you, and I wouldn't say argue, discuss with you is, okay, there is a societal impact, especially when it comes to now you're telling me the GDP consumption, the kind of all of these kind of ROI issues and the problems from society.
Yeah, it costs society.
It costs society at large. That has to be, people have to be aware of it. But then they wouldn't be, I wouldn't subscribe to penalizing them. But I wouldn't give them off-the-shelf advice. It's like, oh, you know what? It's okay. It's fine. No. You have to know that this is how it is. And you did this because of that. And if you need to get help through shortcuts, it can't be off the shelf. Did you try A and B and C? Did you try discipline? Did you try this? Did you give it time? You failed. Why did you fail? What happened? Oh, you failed because you lack discipline? That's good. Then get coaching, get mental health, get all sorts of external support with your family, with your community, with your tribe. Did you try all of that? Did you? Okay, you failed? Okay, fine. Come in. But that's
Yeah, I mean, look, broadly speaking, all of that is expensive and generally unavailable. That's the problem. Even the shortcuts that we're talking about, the injections, right? So we're referencing shortcuts. That's what we're talking about. So
medications, meds, generally speaking.
Right. So you can take a GLP-1 like Ozempic or Mounjaro, and that can accelerate your weight loss. But it's not the solution, because once you stop the medication,
you'll go back.
The compulsion returns. And
absolutely.
So if you haven't institutionalized, if you haven't really cemented the habitual changes over a long enough period of time, that habit becomes permanent, the dopamine cycle that led you to where you
come
were
back
will come
again.
back. Yeah. So the biggest problem that we have, well, there's many problems, but these tools are extraordinarily expensive. The drugs themselves,
It's another problem. So
that's a
now
problem. Yeah.
it's an
But
elitist thing. It's like people who are having the money will get it.
look, I mean, I don't think we're going to solve the world's problems in this conversation. We got to
So,
start
okay,
somewhere.
I'll tell you what. So let's start with this. What's the first principles thinking that you aspire to instill in people?
On a first principles basis is do the lowest hanging fruit stuff, the 5 things that we discussed earlier, which are accessible and available.
No.
Yeah, everyone can do that. I think
Mm.
there's no downside whatsoever in those 5 things. I don't think that's controversial at all. When it comes to the more expensive stuff, then you're doing you're doing an ROI calculation. You're doing it on an individual level. You're doing it at an employer level. You're doing it at a societal level. And so, yes, it's expensive to buy Ozempic. It's expensive to give someone a health coach. It's expensive to give someone a continuous glucose monitor. We haven't talked about that.
Yeah.
All of these things cost money. Fine. But it's an investment. So you've got to calculate at an individual, employer, and societal level, what is the return on that investment?
Absolutely.
In the form of productivity, in the form of reduced hospitalizations downstream, in the form of
lifestyle.
there's all kinds of layers. So it's actually an extraordinarily complex math that one has to do to think about resource allocation. Because the question you're
Yes.
trying to get to is, how do we allocate resources?
Yes.
What's fair and what's not? Now, again, above my pay grade. What I'm doing is operating within the confines of the rules-based
Right.
system that we are in.
Right.
And the rules-based system that we're in is there's a bunch of CPT codes, billable codes that insurance companies will pay for. Okay, I know that. So again, and we can talk about our entrepreneurial journey and what made us, achieve whatever degree of success we have so far versus others who have failed. A big part of us achieving success is understanding how the money flows
Mhm.
and the incentives behind how the money
Yeah.
flows. So I understand how insurance companies operate. I have most of them in network. We're covered, but they don't pay me for most of the stuff that I do.
Mm.
I don't get paid for the health coaches. I don't get paid for the dietitians. I don't get paid for oftentimes the continuous glucose monitors I give
Oh,
people.
wow.
I don't get paid for the free Aura rings that I give patients.
Oh, wow.
Most of what I do, most of the hard work that we
Yes,
do,
yes.
we don't get paid for. So you're going to ask me, why do I do it? Because that's what you need to do to achieve the
'Cause
excellent
it has to be an
outcomes.
all-rounding
Yeah,
setup.
I mean, we have the world's best outcomes right now. The reason we have it is because we've done what no one else is willing to do, because we've gone outside of the bounds of the existing incentive
Yes.
structure. So now your next question is going to be, well, how do you afford to do that? Well, we're self-funded. It helps that I sold a business and had.
Are you raising any? No.
No, we're entirely self-funded. I mean, we're raising debt, but it just to
Right.
build new clinics. But that's a
Where's your
luxury.
operations? Only in the region here?
For now, we're just in Dubai. We're building a couple more facilities in Dubai. It's not public yet, but we're going to have our first international facility later this year. We'll announce it in the
Oh,
summer.
well done. Well done.
Yeah, but yeah. So why are we doing it? Well, we figured out how to hack the system. We have relationships with insurance companies, and we understand how money flows and what they're willing to pay for. Well, what they're willing to pay for was actually an activity that we weren't allowed to undertake as a clinic,
Mm.
right? As a clinic, you have doctors,
Mhm.
and you can bill for that, and you do some limited diagnostics, and like you could do a little ultrasound, or
Right.
and you can bill for that.
Mm.
But most of the money is in the lab and the drug.
Right.
And as a clinic, you are not allowed to be a lab or a pharmacy.
You're not allowed?
Not in Dubai. In some markets, you can.
How are people?
Why? Because there's very high margins in lab, right? And so people were setting up little labs in their clinics and then referring labs to themselves and making a lot of money. So it became mamnu. It became
Yeah. It's like,
So-
what's it call it? Yeah, I got
conflict of interest.
conflict of
Yeah.
interest. Yeah.
And so that sucks for somebody who's diabetic, because if you're diabetic, this is now a lifelong thing for you. And we didn't talk about this, but the burden of being diabetic is that every 3 months you have to go get a blood test. and you have to see a doctor, and you have to do a whole bunch of diagnostics.
Complete lifestyle.
Yeah, dude, it kills you.
Yeah.
You're managing this disease 24/7, especially if you're an insulin-dependent diabetic. Then it's day and night you're worried about your blood sugar levels,
And you
'cause
have
it's
this,
life or death.
Exactly. And you have to take medications according to a certain
So
time.
you have to count your calories, you got to count your carbs, you got to do all that. So it's an extraordinary burden on people. It's crazy. Now, to add on to that burden by saying, okay, you got to go here to take your bloods,
Yeah.
and you got to wait a couple of days, get the PDF, then email it to your doctor, then go see your doctor, then go to a different place and pick up your medications that doctor's prescribed. Oh, and then by the way, you're diabetic, so you also need to see a heart doctor, an eye doctor, a foot doctor, a liver doctor, a kidney doctor. And those are all different appointments in different places on different days. Now imagine productivity losses, imagine mental health effect, just imagine what kind of a life that is. It sucks. Now try to have a disciplined conversation. Now you see how like it becomes a heavy thing. So we looked at this and we're like, God, this is such a human problem. This is not a tech problem.
Yeah.
It's a human problem.
Yeah.
So we approached the government and we said, look, this kind of sucks for diabetics. We want to build something that's all inclusive, that's never been done anywhere. But we need you guys to give us a little bit of a leeway. So we got an exception that we have a lab and we have a pharmacy, all fully vertically integrated, right? So a patient comes to our clinic, I don't even ask for insurance approval. Why? Because it's math at the end of the day, right? So when you go to the clinic, typically what will happen is you'll have some complaint, the doctor will see you, and then they'll apply for insurance approval, right?
Yes.
Why? All they're succeeding in doing is making you wait. Why should
correct.
you wait?
Correct.
At the end of the day, there's some math. There's some like probability that the insurance will either pay or not pay. Okay, it's a rejection ratio.
Yes.
It's quantifiable.
Yes.
Build it into the math. Why make the patient wait? So we just run everybody through. I don't care. If you come into my clinic and you're in network and covered by the insurance companies that work with us, because we operate on a very strict set of protocols that are predictable and we don't go out of bounds, we don't do unnecessary stuff, we've built a rapport with the insurance companies and we know what things are going to be reimbursed and what things might be rejected. And if it's rejected, fine. I still will run the test because I want the data and I want to empower you to achieve your best outcome. No, we do. Right?
Really?
But it's built into the math.
Right.
So,
And that's your sort of how do you say
to make it easy,
Yeah.
right? To make it magical for our patients. They come in, we immediately take your blood, and then that blood goes to the basement and we immediately run it. I'm not waiting for pre-approval. I'm not making you wait. And then after that, I will have a bunch of diagnostics back to back, most of them AI powered, so we don't even need a physician. So extremely low cost for us.
And reliable and valid.
And
So validity and
correct.
accuracy is high.
Yeah, and the data goes in the cloud immediately. So I do an AI-powered thyroid scan. If you have any thyroid conditions, I'll do an AI-powered liver scan to test for fatty liver and fibrosis. I'll do an EKG. I'll do a brachial index score. I'll do a pseudo scan for the foot. I talked about this retinal scan that we do. So we'll do that. We do 2 forms of body composition.
How long would that take typically?
The whole diagnostic process is about 30 minutes.
That's it.
Because we're super efficient, back to back.
Amazing.
Okay.
Well done.
I had a friend, a dear friend of mine. He's now the head of AI at Databricks. He's like, so we ran him through the whole process, and he came out. He's like, dude, what you just did for me in 90 minutes. So the whole journey, all your tests, seeing the doctor, doing everything, an hour to 90 minutes, all in.
That's amazing.
We'll do your bloods and get the results to you in 30 minutes, not 3 days. Okay. So you'll get your blood results by the time you're done with all the other diagnostics and you've broken your fast with a coffee, right? Because we have a little coffee shop. That's why. That's why
everything out.
Yeah. I've got my coffee machine. We have some very good beans. So ahlan wa sahlan, come have coffee. But like, by the time you're done with your espresso, all of your lab results will be finished and uploaded in the cloud. And when you walk into your doctor's office, it's all on the screen. And so you will sit with your doctor the day of your appointment and go through all of your data. And then you will
on the same
learn.
Day. That's
and you'll
unheard
learn.
of.
So this is the beginning of agency.
MashaAllah.
The beginning of transferring agency from the healthcare provider to the healthcare recipient. And we teach the patient, okay, this is what LDL is. This is what HDL is. This is why it's important. This is why we should think about
this
sleep.
is replicable.
Yeah, of course. It's a replicable hyper-personalization. We do it for every patient, but every patient's journey is different.
Yeah.
So everything is ultra customized, but it's the same standard protocol. So the platform and the protocol is standard, but everyone's journey within it is different. We call it a curated journey of self-discovery through your own data. Now, that all happens in the clinic on your first visit, but then we give you your Oura Ring. We give you your continuous glucose monitor. We give you a connected
That's
weight
part of the
scale.
package.
Part of the diabetes package, 100%, and part of the pre-diabetes package, and part of our weight loss package, right? So we have all these packages where we'll just, here, this is your kit, and you download our app, everything gets connected, you leave. Now, while you're in the wild now,
Yeah,
you'd be invisible to your doctor ordinarily
of course.
until you go back for your next visit, which might be in a
But then
year.
with those gadgets, you have access to them.
24/7. I know
course.
exactly what's happening to you. So I can see your blood sugar spikes. I
So
can
you can
tell.
nudge them every time they don't
Exactly.
snooze.
So now I'm that community. I'm that support. I'm that ecosystem trying to give them that agency, try to boost their willpower, try to be that voice, right? So it's fine to have a debate about discipline and willpower. I come from a place where I'm assuming that
Yeah, the last resort of all of that failed and it doesn't work. And
So I want to be that common construct of support behind everyone, whether it's someone who has discipline or doesn't. I want to I want to make it egalitarian or democratize access to
but
discipline,
still, you're
whether it's
pushing-
innate or synthetic.
But you're pushing discipline to the limit, which is good because when you push it to the limit,
And it's data driven.
and it's data driven,
Right.
and it's monitored, and it's coached, and it's sort of tracked,
Yeah.
and that's in my world at least, that's the best form of discipline, because discipline on your own is really, really hard. But
Yeah.
when it's guarded with all of those sort of tracking and controls, it's perfect.
It gets easier.
It gets easier.
Not for everybody. Like,
Do you
it's
have
still
failed
hard.
cases?
I was a failed case.
Really?
Yeah.
How?
Well, the first time I lost I lost 18 kilos and I was injured. So I wasn't working out. And candidly, I wasn't food logging. This was early. Like we had just opened GluCare. And in those early days, I was super bullish on just, we have a bunch of AI tools and we'll automate and
Why?
all bullshit. Like it all failed. I ripped it all out of the system. Okay. Honestly, we had implemented all this kind of stuff.
Humans are amazing.
Ironically, it was from a company that I was the major shareholder in. So I'd invested in another company and I became the customer of that company. And then I ended up ripping all their tech out of my business because it didn't work. Okay. All the AI,
It was all performance.
it was all, it didn't work. All it
It
succeeded
wasn't
in
as
doing.
substantive as you wanted it to be.
It wasn't clinically validated. It was hard to explain. Our
really?
doctors didn't understand how to contextualize it in clinical practice. And all we really succeeded in doing is increasing everyone's anxiety levels. So we ripped it out. And and I'm grateful for that failure because it taught me to really recalibrate around the human and understand that this is a very human problem. It's a very individualized human journey. And humans need other humans to figure shit out, right? Like whenever you have a problem, who are you going to go to?
Yeah.
You're not going to,
100%.
now a lot of us are going to ChatGPT, but
that's
but
horrible.
you'd go to your best friend, you'd go to your mother, you go to your wife, you have somebody that's your sounding board, that's your connection, right? So we're trying to synthetically create that human connection in the context of a healthcare environment backed by data. And that combination, and drugs are in there too. I'm not opposed to using the medications, but it's that combination that takes that guy who woke up at 300 pounds, who sees a brick wall in front of him because he's too heavy to get out of bed, too heavy to get the discipline and willpower to go to the gym. I'll say, look, here's what your bloods say. Based on your profile, the future doesn't look good for you. These are your real risks. If you do nothing, with a high degree of likelihood, this is what your life will look like. And we will set that stage for the patient. We'll give them that expectation. And then we'll say, but good news is that it's not fixed. You have the power to change it. We're here to help you. And these are the tools. There's data tools, there's medication tools, there's lifestyle tools, behavioral tools. There's a bunch of tools, and we're going to offer those tools to you. Figure out which tools work for you. You don't have to use all the tools.
Yeah.
You might, but maybe one of those things works better than the others for you. We'll double click on that, but that's a journey. And so the doctor will sit with that patient and come to this like common understanding of the picture, the goals, and how to get there.
How long is the journey?
It depends who you are.
On average.
If it's diabetic, it's a lifelong journey. If it's a pre-diabetes reversal, it's generally about a year.
A year. Okay.
Yeah. I used to think it was shorter.
Weight loss?
Weight loss also about a year.
About a year. Okay, makes sense.
We have an 80% success rate in reversing.
Wow, that's amazing.
specifically 80% success rate in reversing prediabetes in 3 months.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
80%.
80% in 3 months. But that's based on lab values of like blood sugar.
Yeah. And people have to kind of carry forward
Yeah.
those.
I would
habits.
push that to a year just to lock in all the behavior
Yeah.
change, right? And weight loss too. Like the worst thing is most people who are using GLPs right now are probably not going to have a positive ROI. Most people who are on them are using them incorrectly, self-medicating, and not doing the behavioral change. You asked me what was the failure that I did? It was the same thing. This is early days in GluCare. We were using GLPs off-label. No one had heard of Ozempic, by the way, when we were using them, because we were a diabetes practice, so we were using these drugs for their indication, which was diabetics, but we were using them off-label for weight loss before they got the indication, which is typical. You do that as clinical practice, and I was less interested in the weight loss, more interested in the prediabetes reversal, because for me that was the risk piece, and when I hit my goals,
you're cocky.
I was like, well, okay, I hit my goals. Great. I don't need the drug anymore. Right. So I got off the medication and things were fine for a few months, but then I started traveling. You go to Disneyland and In-N-Out Burger and Krispy Kreme and, in the States especially. And when I came back from holidays, I had regained most of the weight. But worse, I had gotten back to the pre-diabetic threshold. And so I understood, oh God, before anyone in the world really had told me this, it's not about the drug and the drug's not going to work, right? Now you see a lot of people sending signals to say, hey, the medications on their own are not the answer. But when I was on that journey in 2021, that message was not out in the world, right? So I experienced it real time. I was like, oh my gosh, I just spent a bunch of money and a bunch of time on these medications, and now I'm back
zero.
And I had lost a significant amount of lean mass in the process,
of course,
which was also something that people are talking about today, but back then nobody was talking about it. It was super early days. So the second time around, I went on a medication twice.
Okay.
I did Mounjaro the second time, and I stayed on it longer, and I was much more mindful. So the first time around, I didn't change my sleep. I was building a business, and I was one of those guys that bragged about like 4.5 hours.
I know. Hustle culture,
yeah,
right?
Stupid,
it's crazy,
dumb.
I know.
But I really started wearing the Oura ring. I started tracking everything. I got my average sleep from 4.5 hours to 6.5 hours, and I want to get it to 7. Okay, so I set some targets, and I've been working slowly on it. On the nutrition aspect, just portion control, composition. Like I eat well, but I eat too much. Okay. And I have a sweet tooth, which is it's still my Achilles heel. And then on the fitness thing, the first time around I was injured. The second time around, I got a personal trainer. I started managing my stress more actively, yoga twice a week, that kind of thing. So the second time around, I lived it properly. And candidly, that was part of my own product design, right?
Wow.
Defining what we're offering patients was informed by my own journey. Because I knew
get better than this. If you're the target audience, it's just crazy.
Yeah.
So listen, Ali, I'll tell you what, this is amazing. I could go with you for hours, and I know that you have to be places, and I have to be places.
My parking's almost
Your
done.
parking's almost done. But I predicted this. I got to tell you this. But listen, you started by saying, and I don't want to get too personal, but you started by saying you're religious, and then I've read somewhere while I was researching you that you were influenced by a verse in the Quran, which is, if you save one person, one life, it's like you saved all of humanity.
Yeah.
What's that to do with everything that you're doing?
Well, I put that in my medical school applications, that line. That was a very strong North Star for me.
How so?
Because, the cosmic brownie points that come with that kind of contribution, right? It's selfless. We all have selfish ambitions, and there's always vanity. Anyone who says I'm doing this completely selflessly is lying, right? So sure, I love the recognition that comes with being a serial entrepreneur, and I love the recognition of being invited to podcasts. It's nice to have this, and it's nice to be privileged in that context. But the long-term value gets back to this notion of legacy, gets back to this notion of contribution, and it's ingrained in our spiritual framework. And, not a lot of people know this, but one of my degrees in university was religion. And so I studied mostly Sufism, but it was a comparative study on esoteric traditions across the three great religions, because it's kind of all the same, right? Within Judaism
it's
and
like
Christianity.
a comparative sort of way of
Comparative
studying.
studies, right? So,
Right.
how is Sufism similar to the canonism in Christianity and Kabbalah and Judaism?
Yeah.
So, I'd spent 4 years studying that and traveling the world and talking about, things unrelated to
Researching.
science, completely the other side of my,
Crazy.
yeah.
The science and the meta science.
So yeah, exactly. So, unrelated, but both somehow informing
Absolutely. Do you believe in life after death?
my worldview. Yeah, 100%. I mean, look, and a lot of the world's great scientists, and I do not claim to be a great scientist or a great mind, but a lot of very smart people smarter than me, got to the point where they said, I've, beyond the limit of my own human intellect and my own human understanding is the unknown, and that unknown is God, right? And so this notion of humility around, our understanding of our physical space is important to me. And I think I define that to be where I place faith. And then the rest of it is, well, gosh, the rest of it is pretty common. It's just be a good person, do good things, have
It's
good
common
standards.
sense.
Yeah, right.
So if there's one question that you would want me to ask you, what would that be?
One question you'd want me to ask. Okay. What are you most grateful for? If you would ask me that
amazing.
question,
Yeah. What would you? So, okay.
because the answer would be a little bit unexpected.
Okay. That.
I mean, beyond the sort of obvious answers, I'm grateful for my wife and my kids, and okay, let's get all the caveats away. But I'm someone who's had a tremendous amount of adversity in various phases of my life, and I've talked about this in other sort of forums and podcasts and stuff. Like I was expelled from medical school 3 times, and had all kinds of, and I've had legal cases and fights and all this kind of stuff, and
In addition to the health issues and
yeah, all kinds of stuff. So and everybody does, but I've had particularly challenging events. Getting kicked out of med school is not a small thing.
no.
But the one thing that I'm grateful for is that adversity, because you can't buy it, you can't learn it, the lessons that come from it. And so if I were to sit down in front of a founder or, a group of high school students, when was this? Right after COVID, when we started getting out in the world again,
Yeah.
the Boy Scouts.
Yeah.
Right? I'm American. We have the Boy Scouts. And so over at the American school, they had a ceremony for all the Eagle Scouts,
Yeah.
which is the highest attainment. And they asked if I'd come and give an inspiring talk to these like really smart young men that were now Eagle Scouts. And I said, look, I'm happy to talk to them, but can we not talk about the entrepreneurial stuff? I'd rather talk about my failures, if you don't mind. And so I got up and I talked about all my failures. But the punchline was not, hey, let's just sort of, get all of Ali's dirty laundry out in the open. The punchline was, as young, driven men in the Eagle Scouts, you're used to success. But failure is actually more important. And you should seek that failure, because that's where you truly learn. That's where you truly grow. And so the punchline was, not only should you seek it, you should be grateful for it when it happens, even if it's not intended.
You seek it.
Seek it and be grateful
For it when it
Yeah.
happens. That's a complete mindset change for people, because if they do that, how can they get stressed?
Yeah, exactly. So I lead a relatively, I don't want to say stress-free life, but again, and this comes back a bit to, whether you want to call it a religious thing or a cultural thing. There's this, in Farsi, we have a phrase which is Hachi khaire pish miyad, which is whatever's meant to happen will happen. We have this, right?
Yes,
concept.
yes, yes.
Many cultures and religions had
Yes,
it, but like this
true.
notion of, it was destined.
Is that Murphy's Law?
No, Murphy's Law is different. Murphy's Law is,
Whatever is meant to happen will happen, no?
no, that's Murphy's Law is what you essentially what you don't want to happen.
Oh, well, you don't want to happen
Yeah.
happens. Yeah, okay.
No, but this is more like, a
It's
commentary on destiny.
Qadar, destiny.
Yeah, something like that. And so you know, I believe that we all have a degree of will over our own journeys, but I also believe that there's an intelligence beyond that which we control, and sometimes you just got to trust it.
We have to believe in it.
Yeah.
Ali, thank you very much for being here.
Thanks for having me, man.
Thank you.
Good luck on building the platform. I think the more of these kinds of conversations that exist in the world, the better.
That's the
So, yeah.
intention.
Cool, man. Thanks.